warning alarms on the bridge of the transport hauler screaming for attention were the only music Kai had heard in 3 weeks. They harmonized with the rattling of the hull plates and the groan of the sublight engines, creating a symphony of imminent mechanical failure that he was far too tired to appreciate. Kai slammed his hand against the dashboard, silencing the proximity alert for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. The holographic display flickered, washing his scarred face in a bath of dying amber light. He looked like a man who had been carved out of granite and then left out in the rain for a decade. His eyes, dark and heavy with lack of sleep, scanned the readouts with the bored precision of a soldier who had long ago run out of adrenaline. "Status report," Kai muttered, his voice scratching against the silence of the cockpit. The artificial intelligence of the ship, a personality construct that had begun to mimic his own cynical exhaustion, replied through the overhead speakers. Its voice was smooth, synthetic, and irritatingly calm. "We are currently drifting 3 degrees off the projected vector." The AI said, "The navigational dampeners are overheating. Also, the cargo manifest indicates that the temperature in hold 4 has risen by 0.5 degrees. "Great," Kai said, leaning back in his pilot chair, the leather creaking under the weight of his flight suit. "Just great. I am risking a court-martial and a permanent ban from the Trade Federation to babysit high-tech fruit crates. If those biocultures spoil, I do not get paid. If I do not get paid, you do not get the engine overhaul you have been whining about since the Kestrel sector." "I do not whine," the AI corrected. "I provide diagnostic realities. You are the one who chooses to interpret them as complaints. Perhaps you are projecting your own loneliness onto the ship systems again." Kai scoffed, grabbing a pouch of lukewarm water and taking a grim sip. "I am not lonely. I am solitary. There is a difference. Loneliness is a feeling. Solitary is a tactical choice. People are messy. They carry baggage. They betray you. They die. Boxes of genetically modified seeds do none of those things. They also do not laugh at your jokes," the AI noted. Kai was about to retort that his jokes were excellent when the ship lurched violently to the port side. The artificial gravity generators whined in protest, and the mug of wreck calf sitting on the console went flying, splashing dark liquid across the throttle controls. Kai grabbed the yoke with both hands, his knuckles turning white. "Talk to me. What was that?" "Gravitational shear," the AI said, its voice losing the sarcasm and snapping into emergency mode. "Massive energy spike detected directly ahead. It is not on any chart. It reads like a singularity, but the radiation signature is wrong. It is biological. Biological?" Kai wrestled with the controls, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "Space is not biological. Space is a vacuum. Give me full reverse thrusters." "Engaging," the AI replied. "Warning. Thrusters are non-responsive. The energy field has locked onto the hull. We are being pulled in." The view screen, which usually displayed the comforting emptiness of the star field, suddenly erupted in a kaleidoscope of violet and green. It was not the cold light of a nebula, but something pulsing, rhythmic, like the beat of a massive heart. The ship groaned, the metal structure screaming as the gravitational forces twisted the frame. Kai watched the velocity readout climb higher and higher. The uncharted planet loomed rapidly in the window, a swirling marble of dark oceans and storms that glowed with an eerie internal luminescence. It was surrounded by a debris field, a halo of shattered satellites and the skeletal remains of ancient ships that sparkled like diamonds in the planet's orbit. "Brace for impact," Kai shouted, though there was no one to hear him but the machine. "I am routing all remaining power to the structural integrity fields," the AI said. "It has been a pleasure serving with you." Kai: "Yeah. Kai gritted out, watching the atmosphere ignite around the nose of the ship. Sure it has. The world turned into fire and noise. The ship slammed into the upper atmosphere, shaking so violently that Kai's vision blurred. He fought the controls all the way down, trying to turn a fatal plummet into a survivable crash. But the ground was rushing up to meet him with terrifying speed. He saw flashes of dark, jagged mountains and vast, glowing forests before the horizon tilted sharply. The impact was not a singular event, but a series of brutal collisions. Metal sheared, glass shattered, and the world went black. Pain was the first thing to return. It throbbed in Kai's shoulder and radiated down his spine, a dull, insistent ache that told him he was alive, even if he currently wished he wasn't. He gasped, his lungs burning as he inhaled air that smelled of ozone, burnt plastic, and something surprisingly sweet, like crushed jasmine and rain. He blinked his eyes open. The cockpit was gone, or at least the roof of it was. Above him, the sky was a deep, bruising purple, streaked with auroras that moved lazily, like oil on water. Kai fumbled with the release on his harness. His fingers felt thick and unresponsive, but the mechanism clicked open, and he slumped forward, coughing. His flight armor was cracked across the chest, the ceramic plates spider-webbed from the impact. He checked the display on his wrist. Oxygen levels were critical, but the external atmosphere analysis was flashing green. Breathable. High nitrogen, but breathable. He hauled himself out of the wreckage of the pilot's seat. The ship was a ruin. The cargo hold had been torn open, spilling the high-tech containment units across the alien landscape. Smoke curled up from the engines, drifting into the strange, twilight air. Kai grabbed his service pistol from the emergency locker, checking the charge pack. It was damaged, sitting at half capacity, but it would have to do. He climbed over the jagged remains of the hull and dropped 5 feet to the ground. His boots sank slightly into the soil, which was dark and spongy, like moss. He looked up, and for a moment, the pain in his body was forgotten, replaced by sheer, uncomprehending awe. The forest around him was alive in a way no forest should be. The trees were towering spires of crystal and semi-translucent bark, reaching hundreds of feet into the dark sky. Inside their trunks, fluid pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, amber, teal, and magenta, flowing upward like blood in a vein. When Kai reached out to steady himself against a nearby trunk, the surface hummed against his palm, a low vibration that traveled up his arm and settled in his teeth. "It is beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough and probably poisonous. He scanned the perimeter. Rivers of bioluminescent fluid wound through the undergrowth, glowing with a fierce, cold blue light. The plants on the ground were not green but shades of indigo and silver, their leaves curling and uncurling as if breathing the air. It was a world of perpetual twilight, illuminated only by the life it contained. A sound cut through the humming of the forest, a sharp, mechanical whirring. Kai froze. It was a sound he knew. It was the sound of servos and targeting arrays. He crouched behind the wreckage of a landing strut, leveling his pistol over the metal beam. From the shadows of the crystalline trees, shapes emerged. They were drones, but unlike any he had seen in the human territories. These were sleek, silver teardrops that floated silently 3 feet off the ground. They had no visible propulsion, just a smooth, mirrored surface that reflected the glowing forest. In the center of each drone, a single red eye pulsed. They moved with predatory coordination, fanning out to encircle the crash site. Beams of red light scanned the debris, lingering on the scattered cargo containers before snapping toward Kai's position. "Identification," a mechanical voice buzzed from the lead drone. It spoke in a dialect of trade standard that sounded ancient and distorted. "Identification required. Contaminant detected." Kai tightened his grip on the pistol. Contaminant. That was never a good way to start a conversation. "I am a cargo pilot," Kai shouted, his voice echoing in the strange acoustic space of the crystal forest. "My ship suffered a mechanical failure. I surrender. I mean no harm." The drones did not pause. The red eyes flared brighter, the hum of their levitation drives rising in pitch. "Contaminant confirmed," the drone stated flatly. Purge protocol initiated. Small panels on the sides of the silver teardrops slid open, revealing the dark muzzles of energy weapons. Kai cursed under his breath. He had survived 3 border wars and a dozen smuggling runs gone bad, only to be executed by a floating silver egg on a planet that looked like a hallucination. He shifted his aim to the central eye of the lead drone. He would not go out on his knees. He would take at least one of them with him. "Eat this," Kai snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, the air in front of him shimmered. A towering, translucent wall of golden light slammed down between him and the drones with the force of a thunderclap. The shockwave knocked Kai backward against the burning hull of his ship. The drones that had been advancing recoiled, their systems glitching. They slammed into each other, their red eyes flickering wildly as the wall of light expanded, pushing them back into the tree line. Kai blinked, shaking the dizziness from his head. He looked up. The wall of light was fading, dissolving into glittering particles that drifted to the ground like snow. Emerging from the forest, stepping through the fading barrier as if it were mist, were figures. They were tall, draped in robes of deep crimson and midnight blue that seemed to absorb the light around them. They carried long staves tipped with glowing crystals that matched the energy of the shield. They were all women. They moved with a fluid, lethal grace, encircling Kai in seconds. The tips of their staves lowered, pointing directly at his chest. Under the hoods, he could see skin that shimmered with faint iridescence and eyes that held no pupils, just pools of solid color. "Hold," a voice commanded. The circle of guards parted. A figure stepped forward, and Kai felt his breath hitch in his throat. She was taller than him, perhaps by a full head. She lowered her hood, revealing a face that stopped his heart. Her skin was the color of pale moonlight, marked with glowing patterns that traced the line of her cheekbones and throat like living constellations. Her hair was a cascade of silver and blue, but it did not hang down. It floated around her head, suspended in a subtle, personal magnetic field, drifting and curling like smoke in a draft. She wore armor that looked less like metal and more like hardened biological carapace, pearlescent and white, growing seamlessly over a gown of dark, shifting fabric. The armor seemed to breathe, tightening and blossoming with her movements. She looked at him. Her eyes were large, luminous, and filled with a color he couldn't name, something between violet and the heart of a dying star. There was curiosity in that gaze, but also a profound, crushing sadness. She studied his face, his cracked armor, his weapon. "A male," one of the guards whispered, her voice tight with fear. "A Terran male. It is a ghost. He is a contaminant," another guard hissed, stepping forward with her staff raised. "We must cleanse the site. The law is absolute." "Silence," the leader said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried an authority that made the very air seem to vibrate. She took another step toward Kai. He scrambled to stand, refusing to look up at her from the dirt, but his injured leg buckled. He leaned heavily against the ship wreckage, keeping his pistol lowered but ready. "Who are you?" Kai rasped, the pain in his chest making his voice gritty. The woman ignored the question. She reached out a hand, her long, elegant fingers hovering inches from his face. She did not touch him, but he felt a wave of warmth radiate from her skin. tingling against his cheek. "You are real," she said softly. Her accent was melodic, stressing the vowels in a way that sounded like singing. "You are flesh and blood." "I am real enough," Kai said. "And I would appreciate it if you told your toaster ovens over there to stop trying to vaporize me." She looked past him at the retreating drones, then back at the guards. The drones were acting on the ancient protocols. They see a genetic marker that has been forbidden for cycles. "Forbidden?" Kai asked. "Being a man is illegal here?" "That is a new one, even for the Outer Rim." The guard who had spoken first stepped closer, her face twisted in disgust. "He is a danger. High one. He carries the corruption. If we bring him back, if we leave him, the planetary defense grid will reduce him to ash within the hour." The leader interrupted. She turned her gaze back to Kai, and for a second, the regality slipped, revealing a raw, aching hunger in her expression. "I will not allow that." She straightened, her floating hair flaring out as if reacting to a surge of emotion. "He is a guest of the crown," she announced, her voice ringing out through the clearing. "He is under my personal protection. Any construct or guard that harms him answers to me." The guards exchanged uneasy glances, but they lowered their staves. They bowed their heads, though the tension in their posture remained wire-tight. "As you command, Princess." They chorused. "Princess," Kai muttered, sliding his pistol back into its holster. "Of course, just my luck. I crash on a planet that wants to kill me, and I get rescued by royalty." The princess turned to him. She did not smile, but the corner of her eye crinkled slightly. "You can walk. Human?" she asked. Kai gritted his teeth and pushed himself off the wreckage. "I can walk." "Then come," she said, turning back toward the forest. "My home is safe. Here. You are merely a target." The journey to the palace was a blur of neon colors and impossible geography. They traveled on a skiff that hovered silently above the ground, driven by one of the silent guards. Kai sat near the back, watching the landscape pass. The forest gave way to open plains where the grass chimed like glass bells in the wind. In the distance, he saw cities, spires of spiraling organic rock that seemed to have been grown rather than built, glowing with thousands of windows. The palace itself was the crown jewel of this strange architecture. It rose from the center of a massive lake, a sprawling structure of coral-like stone that shifted its color from white to soft pink as the wind blew against it. It looked less like a fortress and more like a massive, fossilized sea creature that had decided to become a castle. When the skiff docked at a high landing platform, Kai stepped off, his boots clicking on the smooth, warm floor. He felt painfully out of place in his battered, scorched flight suit amidst the flowing robes and living armor of the alien women. Everywhere they walked, heads turned, whispers followed them like a wake. Servants froze in the corridors, staring at Kai with wide, terrified eyes. Some covered their mouths, others reached out as if to touch him before pulling back. "He feels heavy." Kai heard one whisper. "He looks like the pictures in the archives." Another murmured, "But scarred, broken." The interior of the palace was overwhelming. The walls were not static. As the princess walked past them, the surfaces rippled, forming intricate patterns of vines and flowers that bloomed and then faded once she had passed. Floating orbs of soft light bobbed in the air, trailing the princess like loyal pets, recording her movements. Kai tried to lean against a wall while they waited for a large, circular door to open, but the wall flinched away from his touch, the material shivering. "Sorry," Kai muttered to the wall. "Touchy." The princess led him away from the main thoroughfares, guiding him through a maze of ascending ramps until they reached a high spire. She dismissed her guards at the entrance, ignoring their protests with a sharp wave of her hand. "Leave us," she commanded. "He is secured." She led Kai out onto a private balcony. The air here was cooler, sweet with the scent of the night-blooming flowers that draped over the railings. The balcony overlooked the vast, bioluminescent gardens below, a sea of glowing blues and greens. Above, the twin moons of the planet hung in the sky, casting long, double shadows across the floor. Kai walked to the railing, gripping it tight. The adrenaline of the crash was fading, leaving him hollow and exhausted. He looked out at the alien city, at the beauty that felt so hostile to him. "So," Kai said, not turning around, "you saved my life. I guess I owe you. My ship is scrap. My cargo is scattered across your forest, and I have about 40 credits to my name. It is going to be a while before I can pay you back." He heard the rustle of her living gown as she moved closer. She did not speak immediately. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. "I do not want your credits. Human," she said softly. Kai turned. The princess was standing in the center of the balcony. The floating orbs had dimmed, leaving her illuminated only by the light of the moons and the faint glow of her own skin markings. She looked smaller now, without her guards. She looked lonely. "Then what do you want?" Kai asked, his defensive sarcasm slipping back into place. "You did not drag me past your killbots just to look at me. What am I? A prisoner? A curiosity? Or did you just need someone to fix a hyperdrive? Because I am pretty handy with a wrench." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them until he could see the gold flecks in her violet eyes. She looked up at him, studying his face, the stubble on his jaw, the scar running through his eyebrow, the hardness in his mouth. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched his chest, right over his heart. She seemed to be checking if it was actually beating. "I saved you because you are a miracle," she whispered. Kai frowned, stepping back slightly. "I have been called a lot of things. Mercenary, smuggler, traitor. Miracle is not usually on the list." The princess lowered her hand, her expression crumbling into a look of profound grief. She turned away, looking out at the city. "This world, my world, is dying of silence," she said. Her voice was steady, but it carried the weight of a century of mourning. "I don't understand," Kai said. "It looks pretty alive to me. The trees hum, the walls breathe. That is biology, not life," she corrected. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. She turned back to him, her eyes locking onto his. "There are no men left on my planet," she said. The words hung in the cool air between them. Kai stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the caveat. But there was none. Her face was open, honest, and devastating. "What?" Kai asked, his voice low. "What do you mean, no men?" "I mean they are gone," she said. "All of them. My father, my brothers, the sons of my people. It happened before I was born, in the time of the Great Sickness, a plague that targeted only the male genome. It took them in a single year. We have been alone for 3 generations. Kai looked at the city below with new eyes. He saw the beauty, but now he saw the stillness in it. The silence he had sensed earlier wasn't just peace, it was an absence. 3 generations? Kai asked. How do you survive? We have gene banks, she explained, her voice clinical but hollow. Cold storage, cloning. We maintain our population through science. But the spirit, the balance, it is broken. We are a world of echoes. She stepped toward him again. This time, the space between them felt charged, electric with the implication of what she was saying. You are the first male I have seen with my own eyes, she confessed. I have seen images, I have seen statues, but I have never seen a living man. I did not know if you still existed out there in the stars. We were told humanity had perished too. Kai ran a hand through his dirty hair. Overwhelmed. I exist. There are billions of us. We are not rare. I am just a guy. I fly a truck. To me, you are the impossible, she said. She moved into his personal space. He could smell the scent of her skin like rain on hot stone. She looked up at him, her lips parted slightly, her eyes searching his face for some sign of rejection. The political calculation in her eyes was there. He was a piece on a board, a lever she could pull. But beneath that was something raw, something that mirrored the deep, aching hole in Kai's own chest. It was the look of someone who had been alone in a crowded room for her entire life. So, she said, her voice dropping to a hush that felt like both a proposition and a plea. For now, human, I invite you to stay with me. Kai looked at her. He thought of his empty apartment back on Terra Station. He thought of the war buddies who were all dead. He thought of the endless, silent drift of space travel, joking with a machine because no human wanted to talk to him. He was trapped here. He had no ship. The planet wanted to kill him. But standing here, in the glow of the moons, looking at this alien princess who looked at him like he was water in a desert, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt seen. Okay, Kai said, his voice rough. I guess I am staying, but my name is Kai, not human, not contaminant. Kai, she smiled then, a small, fragile thing that lit up her face. Kai. She tested the name, the sound strange on her tongue. I am Lyra. Lyra, Kai repeated. Come, Lyra said, gesturing toward a discreet door hidden in the living wall of the balcony. It is not safe for you to be seen by the council yet. They will fear you. They will want to dissect you or destroy you. You must be my secret. She led him into a small chamber adjacent to her private quarters. The room was grown from the same warm, living stone. The walls pulsed with a faint rhythmic heat that mimicked a heartbeat. There was a bed formed from soft, moss-like material and a basin of clear, glowing water. You will sleep here, Lyra said. My inner circle is loyal. They will bring you food. They will heal your wounds. But you must not leave this wing. Do you understand? Kai looked around the room. It was a gilded cage, but it was warmer than the cockpit of his freighter. I understand, Kai said. I will be the ghost in the castle. Lyra paused at the doorway. She looked back at him one last time, her expression unreadable. Rest, Kai. Tomorrow. Tomorrow everything changes. The door sealed shut with a soft hiss, leaving Kai alone in the pulsing warmth of the room. He sat down on the edge of the strange bed, his head in his hands. He laughed, a short, dry sound that had no humor in it. Well, Vex, he whispered to the memory of his ship's AI. You were right. I am definitely not lonely anymore. He lay back, staring at the ceiling that shifted like a kaleidoscope above him, and for the first time in a long time, he fell asleep without the screaming of alarms. The healing process on this planet was less like medicine and more like gardening. Kai lay in the biochamber, watching with a mixture of fascination and horror as translucent, vine-like tendrils extended from the living walls and wove themselves into his skin. They did not hurt. In fact, they felt cool, like the underside of a pillow, vibrating with a low, purring frequency that seemed to knit his bruised ribs and torn muscles back together. We call it cellular singing. The medical drone, a floating orb of soft green light, had chirped at him earlier. The fibers resonate with your healthy tissue and encourage the damaged cells to remember their original shape. Kai had stared at the orb. On my ship, we use staple guns and superglue, he had replied. 3 days had passed since the crash. Kai spent most of them in the hidden chamber adjacent to Lyra's quarters. It was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. The walls shifted color based on the time of day, transitioning from a pale dawn peach to a deep, slumberous indigo at night. The air always smelled of ozone and crushed petals. Lyra visited him often, ostensibly. These were security inspections to ensure the contaminant remained contained. In reality, they were the clumsy, tentative first steps of two species trying to understand one another across a chasm of silence. On the 4th morning, she swept into the room, her presence announcing itself before she even spoke. The walls rippled, turning a brighter shade of gold in response to her biometric signature. She dismissed the medical orb with a wave of her hand. "The swelling in your face has gone down," Lyra observed, standing at the foot of his bed. She wore a simpler gown today, woven from a matte gray fabric that clung to her tall frame, though she still wore the iridescent gorget around her neck, a symbol of her station. "It comes and goes," Kai said, sitting up and testing the range of motion in his shoulder. The vines retracted, slithering back into the wall with a wet sound that made him shiver. "So, is this the part where you tell me my medical bill is astronomical? Or are we just hanging out?" Lyra tilted her head. A gesture he was learning meant confusion. "Hanging out?" she repeated. "Like laundry?" "It is an idiom," Kai explained, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. "It means spending time together with no specific purpose. Just talking." "Ah," Lyra said, a faint smile touching her lips. "Then yes, we are hanging out. I have questions." "Kai." "Shoot," Kai said. She sat on a stool grown from the floor, folding her hands in her lap. Her posture was perfect, too perfect. It spoke of a lifetime spent under the gaze of cameras and courtiers. "Tell me about human music," she said. "The archives say it was used for war. Drums to coordinate marching, horns to signal attack. Is all your art so violent?" Kai laughed, a rusty sound. "Not all of it. Some of it is just about heartbreak, or fast cars, or rain." He tried to explain the concept of jazz to her, tapping out a syncopated rhythm on the side of the bed. He described old Earth movies, the ones he used to watch on the long haul between the Jovian moons and the asteroid belt. He told her about action movies where heroes walked away from explosions without looking back. "Why do they not look back?" Lyra asked. Her brow furrowed. "That seems tactically unsound. They should assess the damage now because it looks cool," Kai said. "It is about style. Lyra." "Style," she repeated, testing the word. She told him about the festivals her people used to hold before the silence fell. The festival of dual moons, where the sky would be filled with floating lanterns that carried the written wishes of the populace. "We do not do that anymore," she said quietly, her gaze drifting to the floor. "Wishes are considered inefficient. The council prefers projection models." The conversation lulled, but it was not uncomfortable. Kai watched her. He saw the crack in the porcelain mask she wore. She was the ruler of a planet, yet she sat in his sick room like a teenager hiding from her parents, desperate for a glimpse of a world she was forbidden to see. Later that evening, the tone shifted. Lyra brought him food, a tray of nutrient-dense fruit that tasted like spiced pears, and stayed while he ate. The shadows in the room were long, casting her face in stark relief. "Why do you hide me, Lyra?" Kai asked, wiping juice from his chin. "I mean, really, you are the princess. Can you not just say, I found a stray? Can we keep him? Lyra's expression hardened. She stood up and walked to the narrow window that looked out over the private gardens. You do not understand our history. Kai, you see the beauty of the city, but you do not see the graves beneath it. Tell me, Kai said. She took a breath, her shoulders rising and falling beneath the gray fabric. It was 40 cycles ago. We were entering a golden age. We had just begun tentative trade negotiations with the Human Federation. We wanted your hyperdrive technology. You wanted our biomatter. It was supposed to be an exchange of knowledge. She turned to face him, her eyes hauntingly bright. Then the sickness came. It started in the spaceports where the human envoys had docked. It was subtle at first. Fever, disorientation. But it only affected the males. Within a week, it was a pandemic. She walked closer, her voice trembling. It was not a death like you know, Kai. There were no bodies to bury. The virus, it unraveled the genetic bonds that held them together. They disintegrated. Men would go to sleep, and by morning, there would be nothing left but dust in the sheets. Dust that glowed for a few hours and then faded. Kai felt a chill run down his spine. That is horrific. My father was one of the first, Lyra whispered. I was 5. I remember he picked me up to show me the moons. He felt warm. The next morning, my mother was screaming. And my brother? He was only an infant. He never even had a chance to walk. She wrapped her arms around herself. The council determined that the virus was engineered. A biological weapon concealed in the human trade goods, designed to wipe out our military and leadership, leaving us vulnerable to conquest. They closed the stargates. They activated the planetary shields. And we have been alone ever since. The mantra was drilled into me before I could read. Trust no male. Trust no off-worlder. Kai sat in silence, processing the story. It was a tragedy of galactic proportions, but something about it scratched at the back of his mind. The engineer in him, the soldier who had seen how messy and chaotic real biological warfare was. Lyra, Kai said slowly. I am sorry. I truly am. If humanity did that, then we deserve your hatred. But what? She asked, wiping a tear from her cheek. A virus that targets a specific gender with 100% mortality and 0 remains? Kai shook his head. That is not nature. That is not even normal weapon design. Biological weapons are messy. They mutate. They jump species. They leave corpses that rot and spread the disease further. A weapon that cleans up after itself? That disintegrates the evidence? That sounds less like a plague and more like a program, Lyra finished for him. Kai looked up, surprised. Yes, she admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. I have had the same thoughts. She paced the small room, the energy radiating off her making the walls hum. I have tried to access the original medical reports from that year. They are sealed, redacted by the High Council. There are references in the old data cores to something called Phase 2 and selective preservation. Why preserve something you claim is extinct? She stopped in front of him, looking down with a mixture of hope and fear. Every time I ask my aunt, the regent, she shuts me down. She says I am obsessing over ghosts. She says the grief is clouding my judgment. But then you fell from the sky, a human male, and you are not carrying a plague. You are just a man. Kai stood up, wincing slightly as his ribs protested. Your aunt is hiding something, he said flatly. And if there is one thing I learned in the war, it is that when the official story is too neat, it is usually a lie covering up a mess. The door chime sounded, soft but urgent. Lyra stiffened, her mask of royalty slamming back into place instantly. "I must go," she said, her voice cool and detached. "The council is convening. They require my presence to ratify the isolation edicts for another cycle." "Take me with you," Kai said. "Impossible," Lyra snapped. "If they see you, disguise me," Kai interrupted. "You said your armor grows. Can you not grow me a shell? I will be a guard, a mute servant, a piece of furniture." "I need to see these people. I need to see the ones who wrote the history books." Lyra hesitated. She looked at him, measuring the risk against the desperate need for an ally. "You cannot speak," she warned. "You cannot react. If you sneeze, we are both dead." "I will be silent as the grave," Kai promised. The council chamber was a vast, circular amphitheater located in the deepest roots of the palace. It was cold here, the air recycled and filtered until it tasted sterile. The walls were not the warm, living coral of the upper levels, but dark, obsidian-like stone that seemed to swallow the light. Kai stood in the shadows behind Lyra's throne. He was encased in a suit of dull gray bio-armor that covered his face completely. The helmet had a one-way visor, allowing him to see out while reflecting only darkness to anyone looking in. He was posing as a tech sentinel, a low-ranking drone operator. The chamber was filled with the elite of the matriarchy. Hundreds of women in flowing robes of jewel tones sat in tiers, their faces illuminated by the glow of holographic displays. At the center of the room, on a raised dais opposite Lyra, sat the regent. Lyra's aunt, High Counselor Varia, was a terrifying figure. She was older, her skin markers faded to a deep, burning crimson. She sat in a floating chair that was hooked into the room's mainframe, cables running from the base of her skull into the chair's headrest. She was half flesh, half machine, a technocrat who had literally plugged herself into the power structure. "Daughter of the blood," Varia's voice boomed, amplified by the room's acoustics. "We await your words. The people need to be reminded of the danger that lurks beyond the sky." Kai watched Lyra. She sat stiffly on her throne, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly that the living wood was turning white. She stood up. She looked small against the backdrop of the massive dark screen that displayed the galaxy map, with the planet depicted as a lone fortress of light in a sea of red danger zones. "Citizens," Lyra began, her voice steady but lacking its usual warmth. "We gather to remember the lost. We remember the fathers and sons taken from us by the treachery of the void." Kai listened as she recited the speech. It was clearly not her own words. It was a litany of fear. She spoke of the cruelty of men, of the chaos of the outside universe, and of the safety found only in silence and obedience. "We reaffirm our walls," Lyra said, her voice catching slightly on the word. "We reaffirm that there is no place for the male contaminant on our world. We choose purity. We choose survival." Kai saw her hands trembling. He felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. They were using her. They were using her grief to cement their power, forcing her to be the mouthpiece for a lie she didn't believe. Varia smiled, a thin, mechanical expression. "Well spoken, princess. The edict is renewed. The sky remains closed." As the session ended and the counselors began to file out, Varia's floating chair drifted closer to Lyra. The regent's eyes, one organic and one cybernetic, bored into her niece. "You seemed hesitant today." "Lyra," Varia purred, "your voice lacked conviction." "I am tired, Aunt," Lyra said, not meeting her eyes. "The anniversary of the plague is always difficult. Do not let sentiment cloud your duty," Varia warned. "Weakness is a crack in the hull, And we all know what happens when the hull breaches. Varya's gaze flicked to Kai standing in the shadows. The cybernetic eye whirred, focusing. New guard? Varya asked. I do not recognize his biometric signature. He is a transfer from the outer perimeter, Lyra said quickly, stepping between them. A specialist in drone repair. Varya hummed, a sound like a high-tension wire. Ensure he is vetted. We cannot be too careful. There have been disturbances in the energy grid lately. Varya drifted away, her cables trailing behind her like the tails of a rat. Back in the safety of Lyra's private chambers, the dam broke. The moment the heavy doors sealed, Lyra ripped the ceremonial gorget from her neck and threw it across the room. It struck the wall with a heavy thud, startling the data orbs. Lies! She screamed, her voice raw. It is all lies. I am a puppet. Kai. Just a pretty face to tell them that the cage is for their own protection. She paced frantically, her fingers digging into the living armor at her waist as if she wanted to tear it off. Her skin was glowing with intense emotional heat, the constellations on her arms flaring bright white. Did you hear her? Lyra demanded, spinning to face him. She talks about purity while she plugs herself into a machine. She talks about survival while she strangles our future. Kai removed his helmet, setting it on a table. He watched her, his heart aching for the fury and the helplessness radiating off her. Lyra. Stop, he said gently. I cannot stop, she cried. I looked into their faces, the mothers who lost sons, the daughters who will never know a father, and I lied to them. I told them the enemy is out there, but the enemy is in this room. The enemy is sitting in that chair. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving. She looked like she was about to shatter. Kai crossed the room in 2 long strides. He didn't think. He just acted. He reached out and grabbed her wrists, halting her frantic pacing. Lyra, look at me, he commanded. She froze, gasping, her eyes wide and wild. She looked at him, really looked at him, and the anger began to bleed away, replaced by something more fragile. You are not alone in this, Kai said, his voice low and rough. You are not a puppet. You are the one who saved me. You are the one who is asking the questions they are afraid to answer. Lyra looked down at his hands gripping her wrists. His skin was rough, scarred, and warm. So incredibly warm. She turned her hands over, her fingers sliding against his palms, finding the pulse point at his wrist. She pressed her thumb against it. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. It is so strong, she whispered, her voice full of wonder. A male heart. I was told it was a chaotic thing, a violent rhythm, but it is just steady. She looked up at him, and the air in the room changed. The political rage evaporated, leaving behind a sudden, terrifying intimacy. They were inches apart. Kai could see the flecks of gold in her violet eyes. He could feel the heat of her skin radiating against his. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence of the palace fell away. There was only the sound of their breathing and the hum of the living walls. Kai felt a pull, a magnetic gravity that had nothing to do with the planet's core. He saw her gaze drop to his lips, then back up to his eyes. She leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. He leaned in to meet her. The desire was there, sharp and undeniable, a hunger born of loneliness and the sheer impossible fact of their existence together in this room. Then Lyra gasped, pulling back as if she had been burned. She stumbled away from him, her hand going to her mouth. No, she whispered, horror dawning in her eyes. I cannot do this. It is treason. It is madness. Kai stood still, his hands empty, his own heart hammering against his ribs. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to de-escalate. "It is not madness, Lyra," he said softly. "It is just biology. We are two people in a room." "No," she said, shaking her head violently. "You are a contaminant. That is what the law says. If I touch you, if I want you, then I am everything they say I am. I am a traitor to my own kin." She turned her back to him, gripping the edge of a table. "We need a plan," she said, her voice shaking but finding its steel again. "We cannot just exist here, hiding and almost making mistakes. We need a purpose." Kai nodded, respecting the boundary she had slammed back into place. "Agreed," he said. "You need a guard, a real one, not a mute technician." Lyra turned back to him. She had composed herself, though her cheeks were still flushed. "I will create a new identity for you," she said. "There is a dormant file in the archives for a sect of elite guards, the Shadow Walkers. They wear full environmental suits and answer only to the throne. I will assign that rank to you. You will be my strategic advisor." "Strategic advisor," Kai repeated, a wry smile touching his lips. "Does that come with a dental plan?" "It comes with access," Lyra said, ignoring the joke. "You will have clearance to the palace network. You can help me dig. You can help me find out what really happened 40 years ago." She looked at him, and the vulnerability was back, just for a second. "And it means you will be at my side," she added softly, "where I can see you." Kai nodded. "Where you can see me. I like the sound of that." The following weeks fell into a rhythm that was equal parts espionage and domesticity. Kai, now clad in a sleek midnight blue suit of bio-armor that he could seal with a thought, became Lyra's shadow. He stood by the door during her meetings, silent and imposing, while his helmet's HUD recorded every conversation and analyzed the stress patterns in the counselors' voices. By day, they were princess and guardian, but by night, behind the sealed doors of her chambers, they were conspirators. They turned her study into a war room. Holographic screens floated in the air, filled with scrolling data streams. Kai used his knowledge of military encryption to bypass the simpler locks on the ancient archives, while Lyra used her genetic clearance to open the heavy data vaults. They worked late into the night, the twin moons tracking across the sky outside the balcony. They were fueled by caffeine-rich tea and a growing, comfortable camaraderie. One night, the tension of the investigation became too much. They had hit another firewall, a file labeled Project Chimera that dissolved the moment Kai tried to copy it. Kai groaned, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his eyes. "That is it. I am done. My brain is melting. I need a break." Lyra looked up from her datapad. "A break? What do you suggest? We cannot exactly go for a walk in the park." Kai grinned. He reached into a hidden pocket of his armor and pulled out a small, battered metal box. He set it on the table. "I made these," he said. "Use the fabricator in the med bay." He opened the box to reveal a deck of holographic cards. "Poker," Kai announced. "The ancient human art of lying to your friends for money." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "I do not have money to gamble with you." "Kai, I own the planet. It would be unfair." "We will play for secrets," Kai said, shuffling the cards with a practiced bridge. "Or chores. If I win, you have to talk to the hydroponics drone about the humidity in my room. It is like a swamp in there." "And if I win?" Lyra asked. "If you win, I will tell you the embarrassing story of how I got the scar on my left knee." "Deal," she said. He taught her the rules of Texas Hold'em. He explained the hands, the blinds, and the concept of bluffing. He thought he had her. She was a literal princess who had never lied until recently. He figured she would be an open book. He was wrong. 3 hands in. Lyra pushed a stack of virtual chips into the center. "All in," she said calmly. Kai looked at his hand. 2 pair, kings and eights. It was a strong hand. He looked at Lyra. Her face was serene, her eyes unblinking. "You are bluffing," Kai said, narrowing his eyes. "You are trying to buy the pot." "Am I?" she asked. "I call," Kai said, pushing his chips forward. Lyra turned over her cards. A straight flush. Kai stared at the table. "That is statistically unlikely." "I calculated the shuffle velocity and the randomized light patterns of the holographic generator," Lyra said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "The probability of you holding a winning hand was less than 4%. "You counted cards?" Kai asked, outraged. "You cannot count cards in a holographic deck." "I did not count cards," she corrected. "I calculated the algorithm. It is simple math, Kai." She swept the virtual chips toward her, a rare, genuine laugh escaping her lips. It was a bright, musical sound that seemed to banish the shadows of the room. Kai leaned back, crossing his arms, but he couldn't help smiling. "Remind me never to take you to a casino on Mars. You would bankrupt the syndicates in an hour." The laughter faded into a comfortable silence. They sat there, the cards glowing between them, and for a moment, they weren't a human and an alien, or a pilot and a princess. They were just 2 people finding joy in the dark. But the darkness was watching. The next morning, the atmosphere in the palace had shifted. The servants moved with their heads down. The corridors felt colder. Lyra was summoned to Varia's chambers. She ordered Kai to stay behind, sensing a trap, but he monitored the audio feed from a listening bug he had planted on her armor. Varia's voice was smooth like oil on a blade. "There are rumors," Lyra whispers among the staff. "They say your new advisor walks with a heavy step. They say he smells of ozone and old worlds." "He is efficient," Lyra's voice replied, steady and cold. "That is all that matters. Curiosity is a dangerous thing." "Niece," Varia said. "Unsanctioned curiosity can lead to accidents." As Kai listened, the lights in his room flickered. The wall screen glitched, the image of the garden distorting into static. Kai stood up, his hand going to the weapon concealed at his hip. He scanned the room. High in the corner, where the ceiling met the wall, a section of the living coral parted. A small, dark drone, no larger than a beetle, peered out. It wasn't one of the palace's security bots. It was unauthorized. Its single lens rotated, focusing directly on Kai. Kai stared back at it, his blood running cold. "They know," he whispered to the empty room. "Or they suspect." The drone retracted instantly, the wall sealing over as if it had never been there. But the message was clear. The time for hiding was running out. The game of poker was over. The real gamble was about to begin. The decrypted file did not open with a bang, but with a whisper. Kai and Lyra had spent the last 3 nights hunched over the holographic console in her study, their faces illuminated by the scrolling cascade of corrupted data. They looked like ghosts haunting the same room, fueled by stim tea and a shared, gnawing dread. The file they had been hunting, the one referenced in the Shadow Walker archives as the continuity protocol, finally cracked under Kai's brute force algorithm. It was not a text document. It was a navigation log. "Coordinates," Kai said, his voice rasping with fatigue. He pointed to the string of star charts floating in the air. "These are not planetary coordinates, Lyra. These point to the L5 Lagrange point of your 3rd moon, the dead one." Lyra leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "There is nothing there." That sector is a debris field, the grave of the old orbital shipyards. Kai tapped the console. Not according to this. This log shows a supply drone launch every 30 days for the last 40 years. Destination? Vault 7. Vault 7, Lyra repeated. She stood up, the living armor of her gown shifting restlessly, turning a stormy gray. The council calls the gene bank Vault 1 through 6. There is no 7. Not in the official records. If there are supplies going up, Kai said, looking at her grimly, then there is someone up there to receive them. The implication hung heavy in the room. If someone was alive up there, hidden in the graveyard of space, it shattered the lie that the planet was entirely alone. We have to go, Lyra said. We have no ship, Kai countered. My freighter is a lawn ornament in your garden, and the planetary blockade shoots down anything that tries to leave atmosphere without a council code. We do not need a ship, Lyra said. We have the gate. The Stargate was not a machine in the way Kai understood machines. It was buried deep beneath the palace, in a cavern that smelled of wet earth and ancient ozone. To reach it, they had descended a spiral staircase carved directly into the bedrock, passing checkpoints that Lyra bypassed with a pulse of her bioluminescent signet. The chamber was vast, lit only by the faint phosphorescence of the lichen clinging to the walls. In the center stood the gate. It looked like the ribcage of a leviathan. Curved, white spires of bone and crystal rose from the floor, fusing at the top to form a perfect circle 30 feet high. Dark matter circuitry pulsed through the bone like black veins, throbbing with a low, subsonic rhythm that made Kai's teeth ache. It has not been opened since the sickness began, Lyra whispered, her voice echoing in the emptiness. My aunt sealed it. She said the universe had nothing left to offer us. Kai walked around the base of the ring. It is beautiful and terrifying. How do you turn it on? There is no control panel. It responds to the blood of the ruling line, Lyra explained, stepping onto the dais at the gate's base, and it responds to intent, emotional resonance. In the old days, gatekeepers would train for years to harmonize their minds to open a stable wormhole. She placed both hands on the cool, white surface of the bone ring. She closed her eyes. Kai watched as her markings began to glow. The light started at her fingertips, traveled up her arms, and flooded into the constellations on her face. The gate responded. A low hum filled the room, growing louder, vibrating in the floor plates. The space inside the ring began to distort, twisting like heat haze on a tarmac, but it did not open. The energy flared and sputtered. The distortion rippled violently, then collapsed. Lyra gasped, stumbling back as if she had been shoved. Lyra. Kai caught her before she fell. It is resisting, she panted, sweat beading on her forehead. The interface, it feels heavy. It requires more stability, more anchors. It was designed to be opened by a pair, a matriarch and a consort, to balance the psychic load. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and desperate. I cannot do it alone. Kai looked at the massive, dormant machine. I am not a gatekeeper. Lyra, I am a pilot. I fly with thrusters and fuel, not feelings. You are here, she said, gripping his arms. You are part of this now. The gate reads the immediate environment. It senses your heartbeat. It senses your adrenaline. If we are out of sync, the tunnel collapses. She pulled him onto the dais. Stand with me, she commanded. Kai stepped up. He placed his hands on the bone ring next to hers. It felt surprisingly warm. Alive. What do I do? He asked. Just breathe, Lyra said. Focus on where we are going. Focus on the truth. And of its feel me. She closed her eyes again. Kai did the same. He felt her hand slide over his. her fingers interlacing with his. He felt the heat of her palm. He tried to clear his mind of the fear, the tactical analysis, the sarcastic commentary. He focused on the beat of his own heart. Thump, thump. He felt her pulse against his thumb. It was faster, lighter. Thump, thump, thump. Match me, she whispered in his mind. He slowed his breathing. He visualized the rhythm of the ship engines he used to fly, steady, powerful, consistent. He felt her heartbeat slow down to meet his. The two rhythms drifted closer, syncopating, until they locked into a single, driving beat. The gate screamed. A beam of pure white light erupted from the circumference of the ring, rushing inward. The air inside the circle vanished, replaced by a swirling vortex of stars and darkness. The wind howled, pulling at their clothes, but they stood anchored by their grip on the machine and on each other. Jump, Kai yelled. They leaped into the void. The transition was instant and brutal. One moment they were in the warm, damp cavern, the next, they were spat out onto a cold metal deck. Kai hit the floor, rolling, his combat instincts taking over. He came up in a crouch, his weapon drawn. Lyra landed less gracefully, stumbling and falling to her knees. They were in a hangar bay, but it was dead. The air was freezing, biting at the exposed skin of Kai's face. Dim. Orange emergency lights flickered overhead, casting long, jumping shadows. The silence was absolute, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the hiss of the air recyclers struggling to function. Gravity is low, Kai noted, his voice sounding flat in the thin atmosphere. Maybe 0.8 standard. He moved to Lyra, helping her stand. She was shivering, her breath misting in the cold. "This is it," she whispered, looking around. Vault 7. It was a ghost station. Floating tools, wrenches, data pads, hydration packs, drifted lazily in the air currents. Abandoned mid-task. Dust motes danced in the light beams like microscopic stars. They moved out of the hangar into the main corridor. The architecture here was utilitarian. Stark metal and plastic, a jarring contrast to the organic beauty of Lyra's palace. It felt like a tomb. They found the first evidence 3 sectors in. It was a laboratory. The glass doors were shattered, shards floating in the hallway. Inside, row upon row of stasis pods lined the walls. Kai wiped the frost from the faceplate of the nearest pod. He froze. Inside, suspended in a blue gel-like suspension fluid, was a silhouette. It was humanoid. Broad shoulders, narrow hips. "It is a man," Kai said, his voice hollow. Lyra moved down the line, wiping pod after pod. "There are hundreds of them," she said, her voice rising in panic. "Hundreds. They are not dead. The biometrics on the console are green. They are sleeping." She stopped at a terminal that was still active, its screen scrolling with automated reports. She began to read, her eyes darting back and forth. Project Continuity. She read aloud. Subheader, Selective Male Retention. She tapped a file, opening a video log. The face of an older woman appeared, a counselor Kai recognized from the history archives. She had died 20 years ago. Log entry 419, the woman on the screen said calmly. "The culling phase is complete. The uncontrollable elements have been neutralized. We have secured the genetic stock necessary for future breeding programs. These subjects have been selected for high physical resilience and low aggression markers. They will be kept in cryostasis until the population models require genetic infusion." The woman paused, adjusting her glasses. "It is imperative that autonomous male agency is eliminated. They are to be awakened only for extraction, and then return to stasis. We cannot risk the re-emergence of the patriarchal chaos. They are the seeds, not the gardeners. End log." The screen went black. Kai stood frozen, a cold fury rising in his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Seeds. He spat the word out. That is what we are. Livestock. Frozen sperm banks with a heartbeat. He turned away from the pods, pacing the small room, kicking a floating chair out of his way. It spun wildly, crashing into the ceiling. This is not protection, Lyra. This is not survival. This is a farm. Lyra did not answer. She was standing in front of the terminal, her hands gripping the edge of the console until her knuckles were white. She was shaking, a violent tremor that started in her shoulders and ran down to her feet. She looked at the rows of frozen men. Then she looked at the reflection of her own face in the dark glass of the observation window. I hated them, she whispered. Kai stopped pacing. What? I hated them, she said louder, turning to face him. Her eyes were wet, swimming with tears that refused to fall. Growing up, I looked at the pictures of my father and I hated him. I thought he was weak. I thought all men were weak because they died, because they left us alone to deal with the world. I told myself we were better off, stronger. She gestured wildly at the pods, but they did not leave. We took them. We stole their lives and put them in jars. She slumped against the console, the strength draining out of her legs. I am a monster, Kai. I am the queen of a graveyard. Kai walked over to her. He wanted to be angry. He had every right to be angry. He was standing in a room full of his own kind, frozen like slabs of meat. But looking at Lyra, seeing the utter devastation on her face, the anger turned into something else. You did not do this. Lyra, you were a child. But I benefited from it, she cried. I sit on a throne built on this, and... She stopped, her breath catching. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she looked afraid of him, or perhaps afraid of herself. When I found you, she confessed, her voice dropping to a shameful whisper. When I saw you in the crash site, I knew. Knew what? Kai asked gently. I knew you were dangerous. I knew bringing you to the palace was treason, but a part of me did not want to save you because it was the right thing to do. She took a step closer to him, her eyes searching his face, desperate and ashamed. I wanted to keep you, she said, like a secret, like a pet. I wanted to be the only one who had a man. I wanted to lock you in that tower and come visit you and feel special because I possessed something rare. She let out a sob, covering her face with her hands. I am just like them, Kai. I am just like the council. I wanted to own you. The confession hung in the freezing air. It was ugly. It was honest. It cut Kai deeper than any blade. He stepped back, the instinct to protect himself flaring up. He looked at her, the beautiful, glowing alien princess who had saved his life, and saw the darkness that lurked beneath the fairy tale. He looked at the pods, then back to her. You are right, Kai said. His voice was hard, stripped of the gentle humor he usually used with her. That is a terrible thing to think. Lyra flinched, dropping her hands. She waited for his judgment. She waited for him to walk away. But I am no saint either, Kai said. He walked to the window, looking out at the dead gray surface of the moon below. When you took me in, when you put me in that room, I let you hide me. I let you dress me up in your guard's armor. Not just because I was hurt, but because I was tired. He turned back to her. I was tired of the war, tired of the struggle. I looked at you, with your power and your palace and your armies, and I thought, good. Let her handle it. Let her protect me. I wanted to be kept. Lyra, it was easier than being a person. He walked closer to her, closing the distance until they were standing toe-to-toe in the center of the horror-filled lab. "We both used each other," he said. "You wanted a symbol. I wanted a shield." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes wide. You wanted to be mine?" "I wanted to be safe," Kai corrected. "But I am not safe here. And you are not a monster. We are just two people who have been lonely for a very long time, and we forgot how to treat each other like people." The vulnerability in the room was suffocating. The political titles, the species barrier, the history of the plague, it all fell away. There was just a man and a woman, standing in the dark, admitting the darkest parts of their hearts. Lyra reached out, her hand trembling. She touched his chest, not to check his heart this time, but just to touch him. "I do not want to own you, Kai," she whispered. "Not anymore. I just want you." Kai covered her hand with his. The warmth of her skin seared him. "And I do not want to hide behind you," he said. "I want to stand next to you." He leaned in. She tilted her head back. The air between them crackled, the magnetic field of her hair brushing against his cheek. Suddenly, a siren blared. The sound was deafening in the quiet station. Red lights began to strobe, washing the room in the color of blood. Unauthorized organic signatures detected in Sector 4. A mechanical voice boomed. Sterilization drones activated. "We have to move," Kai snapped, the soldier back in control instantly. He grabbed Lyra's hand and they ran. They sprinted out of the lab, down the corridor, their boots clanging on the metal deck. Behind them, they heard the distinct mechanical skittering of multi-pedal security drones, spiders of chrome and laser. "This way!" Lyra shouted, pulling him toward a maintenance hatch. It was jammed. Kai threw his shoulder against it, grunting with effort. It gave way with a screech of rusted metal. They tumbled inside just as a laser blast scorched the wall where they had been standing. Kai slammed the hatch shut and spun the locking wheel. They were in a maintenance alcove. It was a vertical shaft, barely 3 feet wide, filled with humming conduits and pipes carrying coolant. It was dark, hot, and incredibly cramped. They were pressed together, chest to chest, hip to hip. There was nowhere to move. Kai could feel Lyra's heart hammering against his own chest. He could feel the heat radiating from her armor, which had softened and warmed in response to her adrenaline. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, mixing with his own in the tight space. Outside, the drones skittered past, their sensors sweeping the door. Searching. Searching. Kai held his breath. Lyra buried her face in the curve of his neck, her hands clutching the back of his biosuit. They stood like that for what felt like an eternity. The danger was inches away, separated only by a thin sheet of metal. But inside the alcove, the danger was different. The adrenaline of the chase mixed with the raw, exposed nerves of their confession in the lab. Kai looked down. Lyra looked up. In the dark, her eyes were glowing softly, her markings were pulsing with a slow, rhythmic light that matched her breathing. "Kai," she breathed, his name a ghost on her lips. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He just reacted. He framed her face with his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her glowing cheekbones. She leaned into his touch, a sound escaping her throat that was half sob, half sigh. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," he murmured. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a movie kiss. It wasn't graceful. It was desperate. It was the collision of two worlds that had been kept apart for too long. It tasted of fear and sweat and the sweet electric charge of her skin. Lyra responded with a hunger that matched his own. Her arms wound around his neck, pulling him down, pulling him closer as if she could merge their atoms together. The barriers, physical, cultural, biological, dissolved in the heat of the cramped shaft. The humming of the station faded. The threat of the drones became distant background noise. There was only the sensation of her, the reality of her, solid and warm and alive against him. Kai's hands found the clasps of her armor, her fingers tangled in his hair. They moved together with a frantic reverence urgency, exploring the map of each other's bodies in the dark. It was a reclaiming. It was a promise. It was an answer to the silence. The lights of the alcove flickered and died, leaving them in a darkness illuminated only by the constellations on her skin and the fire between them. Hours later, or perhaps only minutes, time had lost its meaning. They lay side by side on a makeshift pallet of maintenance blankets Kai had pulled from a storage locker. The alcove was quiet now. The drones had moved on to patrol the upper levels. Lyra rested her head on Kai's shoulder. Her hair, usually floating, lay draped across his chest like a shimmering silk sheet. She traced the scars on his arm with a gentle finger. "So," she said, her voice husky and low. "This is complicated." Kai let out a short, dry laugh. "You think? You are the princess. I am the fugitive. We are currently hiding in a broom closet on a secret space station full of frozen people." Complicated is an understatement. Lyra propped herself up on one elbow. She looked at him, her expression serious. "But we are not alone," she said. "No," Kai agreed, taking her hand. "We are not alone." He looked at the ceiling of the shaft. "We have to get them out. Lyra, all of them." "I know," Lyra said. She sat up, her spine straightening, the regal bearing returning but softened now by a new resolve. "We cannot leave them here. It is not enough to just survive. Kai, we have to make this right. I have to make this right." She looked down at him. "I will not be the queen of a graveyard. I will be the queen who broke the lock." Kai sat up next to her. "And I will be the guy with the wrench standing next to you." They spent the next hour working in silence, but it was a comfortable, synchronized silence. They hacked the terminal in the alcove, downloading every scrap of data from the station's mainframe. They copied the logs, the genetic maps, the prisoner manifests. They copied the orders signed by the council. "This is everything," Kai said, holding up the data crystal. It glowed with a malignant red light. "This brings down the government. This brings down your aunt. It brings down the world as we know it," Lyra corrected. She took the crystal, closing her fingers around it. "Good." They moved back to the hangar bay with the precision of a special ops team. They avoided the patrols, moving shadow to shadow. When they reached the gate, the air was still shimmering with the residual energy of their arrival. "Ready?" Kai asked. Lyra nodded. She took his hand. There was no hesitation this time. Their hearts were already in sync. They stepped onto the dais. The gate roared to life instantly, recognizing them not just as two genetic signatures, but as a singular unit. The wormhole opened, stable and wide. They stepped through. They emerged back in the cavern beneath the palace. The air was warm and smelled of earth. They collapsed onto the stone floor, gasping for breath, clutching the data crystal between them. "We did it," Lyra panted, a smile breaking across her face. "Kai, we did it." Kai looked at the gate. It was powering down, the light fading from the bone spires. But then, the room turned red. A single harsh alarm tone echoed through the cavern. The walls began to flash with warning glyphs. "Security breach detected," a synthetic voice announced. "Unauthorized gate activation. Biometric mismatch. Asset Lyra status. Compromised. Asset unknown status. Hostile." Kai scrambled to his feet, pulling Lyra up with him. They know, he said, looking at the flashing lights. Lyra looked at the display. Her face paled. It is not just an alarm, she whispered. It is a tagging protocol. They have locked onto our signatures. They know exactly who we are, and they know exactly where we are. She looked at Kai, fear warring with the lingering warmth of their time in the station. The council knows I am a traitor, she said, and they know you are alive. Kai checked his weapon. It was fully charged. He looked at the spiral staircase leading up to the palace. Then we better start running, he said. He took her hand, squeezing it tight. Together? Lyra squeezed back, her eyes fierce. Together. The grand hall of the palace was a masterpiece of biological engineering, a cathedral of white coral that arched high enough to trap its own weather systems. On the day of the ceremony, the air was thick with the scent of crushed lilies and the static electricity of 1,000 waiting bodies. Lyra stood on the central dais, the weight of the ceremonial robes dragging at her shoulders. She looked out at the sea of faces, counselors in their high-collared crimson, regional governors in azure, and the silent masked ranks of the palace guard. They were all watching her. Kai was there too, hidden in the back rows, encased in the matte black armor of a perimeter guard. He was just another shadow in a room full of them. He monitored the comms channels, listening to the chatter of the security detail. It is too quiet, Kai whispered into his helmet microphone, the sound encrypted so only Lyra could hear it via her earpiece. Varya is planning something. Watch your six. Lyra did not react visibly, but he saw her fingers tighten around the staff of office she held. Citizens of the conquered, Lyra began, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the living stone. We gather to honor the purity of our silence. It was the speech she had been given, the lie she had to tell one last time before they could expose the truth. But before she could reach the second sentence, the lighting in the hall shifted violently from a warm gold to a harsh, accusatory red. The massive holographic emitters that lined the walls, usually reserved for displaying star charts or ancestral trees, flickered to life, but they did not show stars. They showed Lyra. The footage was grainy, shot from a high angle, the angle of the drone Kai had spotted in her room. It showed Lyra in her private chambers. It showed Kai out of armor, standing close to her. The angle was distorted, manipulated to make the distance between them seem non-existent, turning a moment of shared grief into something carnal and conspiratorial. A gasp rippled through the crowd, a sound like the ocean drawing back before a tsunami. Behold the rot at the heart of the throne, a voice boomed. High Counselor Varya drifted onto the stage, her levitation chair humming. She pointed a skeletal, cybernetic finger at Lyra. We trusted her to guard the gate, Varya declared, her voice dripping with mock sorrow. Instead, she has opened it to the contamination. She consorts with the male plague. She invites the chaos back into our world. Treason, a counselor in the front row screamed. Perversion, another shouted. The crowd surged. The carefully orchestrated piece shattered in an instant. Guards, Varya commanded, seize the traitor and locate the creature. He is here. The biological scanners have tracked his pheromones. Lyra dropped the staff. She looked at Varya with a hatred that burned brighter than the holograms. You did this, Lyra shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. You filmed me in my own home. I did what was necessary to save the state, Varya replied coolly. Take her. 4 elite guards, women Lyra had known since childhood, moved in. They did not hesitate. They struck her with the blunt ends of their energy staves, knocking her to her knees. No, Kai shouted. He broke cover. He couldn't help it. He shoved through the line of perimeter guards, drawing his weapon. He fired a warning shot into the ceiling, bringing down a shower of glowing dust. "Back off," Kai roared, his voice amplified by his helmet speakers. "There," Varya pointed. "The creature. Kill him." The hall erupted into chaos. Energy bolts sizzled through the air. Kai dove behind a pillar of living stone as the spot where he had been standing was disintegrated by a dozen converging beams. "Run, Kai," Lyra screamed, struggling as the guards dragged her away. "Do not let them take you. Run." He wanted to charge the stage. He wanted to tear the room apart to get to her. But he was one man against an army, and if they caught him now, the truth about the vault would die with him. "I will come back for you," Kai promised, though he knew she couldn't hear him. He turned and sprinted toward the side exit, firing blindly behind him to keep the guards' heads down. The palace was not just a building, it was a loyal subject of the crown, and currently, the crown was Varya. As Kai ran through the corridors, the architecture itself turned against him. The floor rippled like liquid, trying to trip him. The walls expanded, bloating outward to crush him in narrow passages. Stupid mood ring architecture. Kai grunted, sliding under a closing archway just before it sealed with a wet thud. He turned a corner and found himself facing a dead end. The corridor had simply knit itself together, a wall of smooth white bone blocking his path. Behind him, he could hear the heavy boots of the pursuit team. "Think, Kai. Think." The door was a biomechanism. It responded to neural inputs and emotional resonance. He grabbed a heavy ceremonial vase from a plinth, an ugly thing that looked like a screaming fish, and jammed it into the seam of the wall where the muscle fibers were trying to fuse. The wall shuddered, confused by the obstruction. "Open," Kai yelled, slamming his hand against the sensory pad. The wall remained stubborn, sensing his aggression. It tightened around the vase, crushing the ceramic to dust. "Damn it," Kai hissed. He remembered what Lyra had told him about the palace responding to the royal bloodline's emotional state. He wasn't royal, but the systems were empathetic. They reacted to tone. "I am so happy to be here," Kai shouted at the wall, forcing a manic, desperate joy into his voice. "I am just bursting with love and contentment. Let me pass so I can spread the joy." The wall hesitated. The aggression sensors were confused by the conflicting data. The fibers loosened just an inch. Kai didn't wait. He drew his combat knife and slashed at the exposed nerve cluster in the gap. The wall shrieked, a horrible organic sound, and recoiled, snapping open. Kai dived through, rolling to his feet on the other side. He was in the service tunnels now, the veins of the palace. It was darker here, smelling of compost and recycled water. He leaned against a dripping pipe, catching his breath. His armor was scorched, his lungs burning. "You look lost." "Soldier," a voice said from the shadows. Kai spun around, weapon raised. A small woman in a grease-stained tunic stepped out from behind a filtration unit. She held a wrench like a club, but her eyes were not hostile. They were curious. "I am not a soldier," Kai said, lowering the gun slightly. "I am the janitor. Very aggressive cleaning schedule today." "I know who you are," the woman said. "I saw the broadcast. You are the ghost, the contaminant." She took a step closer, studying his face through the cracked visor of his helmet. "I am Alara," she said. "I maintain the waste recyclers, and I think you should know that the elite guard is sweeping the upper vents. If you stay here, they will flush you out in 10 minutes. "Why tell me?" Kai asked, his muscles tense to spring. "Why not turn me in? I am worth a lot of credits right now." Ilara looked down at her wrench. "I heard the princess singing once," she said softly. in the gardens. She thought she was alone. She was singing an old lullaby, a song about 2 moons and a father who comes home. She looked up at Kai. A traitor does not sing songs about missing her family, and a monster does not throw himself in front of an army to save her. She pointed to a grate in the floor. That leads to the sub-levels, the roots. The security sensors do not work down there because the biomass is too dense. There are people there, people who remember the old stories. They will help you. Kai looked at the grate, then at Ilara. "Thank you," he said. "Go," Ilara urged, "before I change my mind and decide I want the reward." While Kai descended into the dark, Lyra was ascending into the light, but it was a cold, artificial light. She was strapped to a chair in the interrogation spire, the highest point of the palace. The room was a sphere of glass, offering a panoramic view of the empire she had ostensibly ruled but never controlled. Varia stood by the window, looking out at the city. The technocrat, a woman whose face was half covered by a silver interface mask, stood by the console, monitoring Lyra's vitals. "Why?" Lyra asked, her voice hoarse. The restraints on her wrists were living vines, tightening every time she struggled. Varia turned. She looked genuinely confused. "Why what, Lyra? Why did I stop you from destroying our society? Why lie?" Lyra spat. "The plague was not an accident. We found the station and we saw the pods. You didn't just let the men die and you farmed them. You locked them away like cattle. It was necessary." The technocrat spoke, her voice synthesized and flat. "The data is irrefutable. Prior to the isolation, 90% of all violent crime was committed by males. Wars were resource drains driven by male aggression. Since the silence, global productivity is up 40%. Conflict is down to near zero. Because you killed half the population," Lyra screamed. "That is not peace. That is a graveyard. It is efficiency," Varia corrected. "We removed the chaotic variable. And look at us. Lyra, we are a paradise. We are self-sustaining. We are safe." "Safe?" Lyra laughed, a brittle, broken sound. "We are stagnant. We are dying of loneliness. I see it in the eyes of everyone in the court. We are just waiting for the lights to go out." "You are projecting your own weakness," Varia said, walking over to the chair. "You were always too soft, too much like your father. He was a dreamer. He thought we could talk to the stars." She leaned down, gripping Lyra's chin. "We do not need the stars, and we do not need men. We have the genetic banks. We have the future planned out for the next 1,000 years." "What about love?" Lyra whispered. Varia sneered. "Love is a chemical defect. It makes you irrational. It makes you bring a stray animal into the palace and risk everything." She straightened up, nodding to the technocrat. "Prepare the mnestic recalibration suite." Lyra's blood ran cold. Recalibration. It was a polite word for a mind wipe. "You cannot do that," Lyra said, panic rising in her chest. "I am the queen. You are a liability," Varia said. "We will strip away these chaotic memories. We will remove the human from your mind. When you wake up, you will be the perfect ruler we raised you to be. Cold, logical, and alone." The technocrat tapped a command. A halo of light descended from the ceiling, hovering inches above Lyra's head. It hummed with a terrifying, high-pitched frequency. The roots of the city were less a basement and more a swamp. Kai waded through knee-deep water that glowed with bioluminescent algae. The air was thick and humid. He had been led here by Ilara's directions. And now, he was surrounded. A dozen figures emerged from the gloom. They were not soldiers. They were ragged, wearing patched clothes, their faces smeared with glowing mud. But they held tools, mining lasers, heavy spanners, sonic drills, like weapons. These were the believers. The underground sect that Alara had mentioned. A woman with white hair and skin like cracked leather stepped forward. She held a lantern fueled by glowing sap. "The Skyfaller," she said, her voice sounding like grinding stones. "You are uglier than the stories say." "I have had a rough day," Kai said, holding his hands up. "I need help." "They have Lyra." "We know," the woman said. "The broadcast is playing on the public feed. They are preparing the recalibration." Kai felt a surge of adrenaline. "How long do we have?" The woman shrugged. "An hour, maybe less." "I need to get into the spire," Kai said. "Impossible." A younger rebel said, "The elevators are locked down. The guards are on high alert. You would be cut to pieces before you reach the lobby." "I do not need the lobby," Kai said. "I need a path that they are not watching." He looked around the damp, dripping cavern. His eyes landed on a massive rusted pipe that ran vertically up into the darkness. It was labeled with a hazard symbol that looked suspiciously like a biohazard warning. "Where does that go?" Kai asked. The old woman followed his gaze and chuckled. That is the waste expulsion conduit. It runs directly from the spire down to the recyclers." "It is a straight shot?" Kai asked. "If by straight shot you mean climbing 3,000 feet through a tube coated in royal sludge, then yes," the woman said. Kai grimaced. He looked at his armor, then at the pipe. "Well," Kai said, sighing, "I always wanted to storm a castle through the toilets. It adds a certain romance to the rescue, do you not think?" The rebels looked at each other, grinning. "We can override the flush cycle," the young man said. "Give you a 20-minute window before the next deposit." Kai checked his weapons. 20 minutes. Let's do it. The climb was, predictably, a nightmare. The conduit was slick, dark, and smelled indescribable. Kai climbed using magnetic grips on his gloves and boots, his muscles burning with every meter. He tried not to think about what the slime coating his armor actually was. "Just think of the story," he muttered to himself as he slipped a few inches. "Think of how funny this will be when we are not about to die." He reached the access hatch for the detention level with 2 minutes to spare before the flush cycle resumed. He braced his legs against the walls of the tube and activated his laser cutter. The metal sizzled, glowing orange. He kicked the grate in. It clattered onto the pristine white floor of a hallway. Kai pulled himself out, dripping and smelling like a sewer, and landed in front of 2 very surprised guards. "Did you order a plumber?" Kai deadpanned. Before they could raise their rifles, he dropped them with 2 precise stun shots to the chest. He checked the map he had downloaded from Alara's datapad. The detention wing was to the left, but as he ran past a set of unmarked blast doors, he stopped. The data crystal in his pocket, the one they had stolen from the station, was pulsing. It was reacting to a signal nearby. Kai looked at the door. It wasn't a cell. It was a cold storage unit. He hacked the panel, the door sliding open. The room beyond was freezing. It was lined with cryopods, identical to the ones on the station. But these were older, dustier. Kai walked down the rows. He saw nameplates. Some were dated 40 years ago. He stopped at a pod near the end. The nameplate read, Prince Kalen. Age 4 cycles. Kai wiped the frost away. The person inside was not 4 years old. He was a man. He looked to be in his 20s, his face a sharper, harder version of Lyra's. He had been aged, whether artificially or simply because the stasis wasn't perfect. The boy Lyra mourned was gone. In his place was a stranger. Kai felt a wave of nausea. They didn't just keep them. They let them grow up in a box. He heard footsteps behind him. He spun around, raising his weapon, and it was the rebel team. They had followed him up the service elevator he had unlocked. Secure the room, Kai ordered. Wake them up. Now, the rebel leader asked. It is dangerous. They will be disoriented. Wake them, Kai said, his voice hard. If we are going to burn this place down, we need everyone who can hold a torch. The rescue of Lyra was a blur of violence and desperate timing. Kai and the rebels stormed the interrogation spire just as the halo was lowering onto Lyra's head. The firefight was short and brutal. The technocrat took a plasma bolt to her interface mask and collapsed in a shower of sparks. Varia, realizing the tide had turned, fled through a private emergency chute, screaming threats of annihilation. Kai ripped the restraints off Lyra's wrists. She fell into his arms, trembling violently. I thought you were gone. She sobbed, burying her face in his filthy, sludge-covered chest armor. I told you, Kai said, holding her tight. I had to see a woman about a plumbing issue. He pulled back, looking at her. Lyra, we have to go, but there is something you need to see first. He led her down to the cryo bay. When Lyra saw the pods, her knees gave out. Kai caught her, lowering her to the floor. She crawled toward the pod marked Kalen. She placed her hand on the glass. The man inside did not move, but his chest rose and fell with a shallow rhythm. He is grown, Lyra whispered, tears streaming down her face. He was a baby, Kai. I used to sing him to sleep. Now, I do not even know him. He is alive, Kai said gently, kneeling beside her. That is what matters. We can get to know him again. The hissing of releasing pressure filled the room. The pod lids began to pop open. Kalen sat up. He gasped, sucking in air like a drowning man. He looked around, his eyes wild and unfocused. They landed on Lyra. He stared at her with zero recognition. He looked at her royal robes, her crown, and he recoiled, pressing himself back into the pod. No, he croaked, his voice unused for decades. No needles, no more. Lyra reached out, her heart breaking. Kalen, it is me. It is Lyra. The man looked at her, confusion warring with terror. We have to move, a rebel shouted from the doorway. Elite shock troops are breaching the lower levels. Kai pulled Lyra up. We have to get them to the forest. It is the only place the drones cannot track us effectively. They help the stumbling, disoriented males out of the pods. There were 12 of them in this facility. 12 men who blinked at the world like newborn fawns. Their muscles atrophied, their minds scrambled. The escape was a nightmare. They fought their way out of the palace, blasting through the rear gates. The alarm sirens wailed across the entire city. They ran into the bioluminescent forest. The trees, sensing the violence, pulsed with agitated red light. Behind them, the sky filled with hunter drones. Keep moving, Kai shouted, firing his rifle over his shoulder. He and Lyra brought up the rear, fighting back to back. Lyra wielded a guard staff she had picked up, spinning it with lethal grace, deflecting energy bolts. Kai used his rifle, picking off the drones with soldier's precision. They crossed a bridge made of living vines that spanned a glowing chasm. As the last of the refugees crossed, Kai shot the anchor points. The bridge collapsed, sending a squad of pursuing shock troops tumbling into the abyss below. They made camp deep in the ironwood, a section of the forest where the trees were dense enough to block the thermal scanners. They built a fire using the glowing sap of the trees. It burned with a smokeless blue flame. The atmosphere around the fire was tense. The rebels sat on one side, cleaning their weapons. The 12 awakened males sat on the other, huddled in thermal blankets. One of the men, a tall, gaunt figure with wild eyes, stood up. He looked at Lyra with naked hostility. We should go back, he said, his voice cracking. We should kill them all, every last one of them. Other men muttered in agreement. Rage, hot and fresh after years of cold sleep, began to bubble up. "They stole our lives," the man shouted. "They put us in boxes. We should burn that palace to the ground and leave no one alive." Lyra shrank back, the hatred directed at her stinging worse than the interrogation. "Please," she said softly. "Violence will only—" "Be quiet, jailer," the man spat. "You are one of them. You wear their colors." He took a step toward her, his fists clenched. Kai stepped in between them. He didn't raise his weapon. He just stood there, his armored bulk creating a wall. "Sit down," Kai said. His voice was not loud, but it was heavy. It carried the weight of command. The man hesitated. "You are a man," the survivor said. "You should be leading us. You should want their blood as much as we do." "I have spilled enough blood to fill a lake," Kai said quietly. "I fought in the separation wars on the Terran Rim. I saw what happens when you fight a war of annihilation." He looked around the circle, making eye contact with every man there. "You want revenge? Fine. It feels good. For about 10 minutes. Then you are just standing in a pile of ash, wondering why you still feel empty." He pointed to Lyra. "She is not your jailer. She broke you out. She risked her throne, her life, and her mind to save you. She is the reason you are breathing air right now instead of recycled tank gas. But they—" The man started, his anger faltering. "They made you victims." Kai interrupted. "Do not make yourselves monsters. If you go back there with fire and hate, you just prove them right. You prove that we are dangerous, that we are chaos." He walked over to the fire, the blue light illuminating his scarred face. "Identity is not destiny," Kai said. "Just because they treated you like animals does not mean you have to act like them. You are free now. The hardest part of being free is choosing not to hit back." The clearing fell silent. The only sound was the crackle of the sap and the distant hum of the forest. The gaunt man looked at Kai, then at Lyra. He slowly sat back down, pulling his blanket tighter. "Thank you," Lyra whispered to Kai as he sat beside her. "I didn't do it for you," Kai muttered, though his hand found hers in the dark. "I did it because I am too tired to fight another war." Later that night, unable to sleep, Lyra wandered away from the camp to a cliff overlooking the shimmering canopy of the forest. Kai found her there. He stood beside her, watching the twin moons rise. "You were good back there," Lyra said, not looking at him. "With the men I was just talking." Kai said, "No," Lyra said. She turned to face him. "You spoke with honor. You spoke with wisdom." She reached out, touching the breastplate of his armor. "My aunt told me that men were incapable of that. She told me you were simple creatures, driven by adrenaline and lust. She said you lacked the capacity for moral reasoning." "She got that from a very old playbook," Kai said dryly. "When I first invited you to stay," Lyra confessed, her eyes searching his, "I thought I was keeping a curiosity, a dangerous pet, but standing there by the fire, I realized something." "What?" Kai asked. "I do not want you to stay because you are a man," Lyra said softly. "I want you to stay because you are a good man. Because you see us, all of us, clearly. You see the rot in the council, but you also see the humanity in the refugees. You are the moral compass this planet lost." Kai felt a lump in his throat. He had been a drifter, a smuggler, a killer for hire. No one had ever accused him of being a moral compass. "I am just a guy trying to survive." "Princess." He deflected. Lyra shook her head. "No, you are more than that. To me." She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around his waist. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the heartbeat that had become her favorite sound in the universe. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered. Kai wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her silver floating hair. He held her tight, not with the desperation of the chase, but with a deep, exhausted affection. "I didn't find you, Lyra," he murmured into the night air. I think we found each other." They stood there on the edge of the cliff, two fugitives watching the world glow in the dark, gathering their strength for the fight that was to come. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and hunted. But for the first time in the history of the planet, the silence was broken. The irony was not lost on Kai. In fact, it was heavy, dusty, and smelled faintly of mothballs. He was currently crouched in the back of a hovering cargo skiff, hidden beneath a thick, heavy tarp painted with the royal crest. On the side of the skiff, in elegant, glowing script, was the label: "Relics of the patriarchal era, the ruins of the past." "So, let me get this straight," Kai muttered into his helmet comms, his voice a low growl. "The plan is to smuggle me into the heart of your government as a museum exhibit? I am basically a fossil. You are a relic of a chaotic age." Lyra's voice came back, crackling slightly but clear in his ear. "Try to act dusty." "I am cramping up," Kai complained, shifting his weight. "And something is poking me in the kidney." "I think it is a statue of a warlord." "It is a statue of a gardener," Lyra corrected. "But to the council, there is no difference. Just stay hidden." "Kai, we are approaching the outer perimeter." The skiff shuddered as it passed through the magnetic containment field of the Capitol spire. Kai held his breath. He was surrounded by the rebellion strike team, Ilara the engineer driving the skiff, and two of the awakened males, Jax and Torin, hidden in crates marked obsolete weaponry. Through the gap in the tarp, Kai could see the city. It was a blinding spectacle of white spires and flowing energy streams, a monument to perfection. Thousands of citizens lined the streets, tossing bioluminescent petals onto the procession. They were cheering for the end of history, for the final ceremony that would declare the male line officially extinct. If only they knew the corpse in the wagon was armed with a plasma rifle and a bad attitude, Kai thought. The skiff docked at the loading bay of the central broadcasting spire. The moment the engines wind down, the deception shifted into high gear. Ilara hopped out, waving a data pad at the confused dockmaster. "Priority delivery for the high ritual," she shouted, feigning panic. The prime technocrat requested these artifacts be placed on the altar immediately. "Do you want to be the one to tell her the symbol of male aggression was late?" The dockmaster paled and waved them through. Once they were inside the service corridors, away from prying eyes, Kai threw off the tarp. He took a deep breath of the sterile, recycled air. "I hate this place," Kai said, checking the charge on his rifle. "It smells like ozone and lies." He looked at Lyra. She had shed her fugitive's rags and was once again the princess, dressed in a gown of shimmering white bio-silk that seemed to float around her like mist. Beside her stood Kalen, her brother. He looked pale, his eyes darting around the facility that had been his prison for decades. But he stood tall, clutching a stolen guard's staff. "This is where we split," Lyra said. Her voice was steady, but Kai could see the tremor in her hands. Kai reached out, squeezing her shoulder. "You go to the stage," he said. "You keep them talking. You make them look at you. And you go to the gut," Lyra said. "You find the neural core, and I make them listen." Kai finished. He looked at Kalen. "Keep her safe, Prince." Kalen nodded, his jaw set. "With my life." Kai turned to Ilara and Jax. Let's go break some furniture. The broadcasting spire was not just a building, it was a living organism. As Kai and his small team descended into the underlayer, the architecture changed. The polished white stone gave way to throbbing, fleshy walls of dark gray matter. Cables thick as tree trunks pulsed with blue light, carrying data like blood to the brain of the city. This is the neural lattice, Ilara whispered, consulting her scanner. It connects every mind on the planet, every broadcast, every history lesson, every lie flows through here. We need to find the central node, Kai said. Which way? Down, Ilara pointed, into the dark. They moved quickly, sliding down maintenance chutes and scrambling over bundles of warm, vibrating conduits. But the spire was not defenseless. The moment they crossed a threshold into the server farm, the air pressure dropped. Gravity inversion, Kai shouted, grabbing a handful of cables. The world flipped. Up became down. Jax, who hadn't reacted fast enough, fell toward the ceiling, slamming into a cluster of lights with a sickening crunch. I am okay, Jax groaned, hanging upside down, just bruised. Kai pulled himself along the cables, fighting the nausea. The defensive systems were active. Security drones, small and vicious like silver hornets, buzzed out of the ventilation shafts. Contact front, Kai yelled. He fired one-handed, clinging to the cables with the other. The plasma bolts seared through the dark, exploding the drones in showers of sparks. Kai, Lyra's voice came over the comms, breathless and tight. I am at the entrance to the Great Hall. It is full. Millions of people. Hey! Kai grunted, swinging himself over a gap as a drone tried to singe his eyebrows. Do not worry. You are great at public speaking. Just imagine them all in their underwear. That is a terrifying image. Kai, Lyra replied, and he heard a short, sharp intake of breath that might have been a laugh. I aim to serve, Kai said. Now go be a queen. I have some bugs to squash. The Great Hall was a cavern of light. The ceiling was a dome of crystal that magnified the twin moons above. In the center stood the altar of silence, a massive block of obsidian. Lyra walked down the aisle, Kalen walking 2 steps behind her, his face hidden by a hooded cowl. The silence in the room was absolute. Thousands of women watched her, counselors, generals, citizens. At the altar waited the prime technocrat. She was a nightmare of integration. Once human, she was now more machine than flesh. Her lower body had been replaced by a hovering chassis of chrome and glass. Her head was crowned with a halo of data spikes that pierced her skull. Her eyes were gone, replaced by glowing blue sensors. She was the mind of the council, the true power behind the regent, Princess Lyra. The technocrat's voice synthesized, echoing from every speaker. The prodigal daughter returns. We expected you to die in the forest. I am hard to kill, Lyra said, ascending the stairs to the altar. The technocrat drifted closer. You brought a relic, she said, gesturing to the hooded figure of Kalen. A final gesture of submission? I brought the truth, Lyra said. The technocrat laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Truth is a variable we control. Lyra, did you truly think you could change anything? The plague was not a tragedy. It was a filter. Lyra froze. A filter? We are building a perfect society, the technocrat explained, her chassis humming. Men are chaos. Their genetics are predisposed to aggression, to resource hoarding, to irrationality. We removed them to stabilize the equation. She turned to the audience, spreading her mechanical arms. And it worked. We have peace, we have order, but the work is not done. She pointed a finger at Lyra. The human you brought, the survivors you woke. They proved that the biological filter was incomplete. We cannot simply cull the men. We must evolve beyond them. The technocrat looked up at the crystal dome. Tonight, we initiate Phase 3, a planetary pulse. It will not just kill the remaining males. It will rewrite the genome of every female on this world. We will become self-replicating. We will become a single unified consciousness. No more individuals, no more pain. Just the lattice. Lyra stared at her in horror. You want to turn us into a hive mind? You want to erase us? I want to save you from yourselves, the technocrat said. She gestured to the podium. Now, read the speech. Lyra, declare the end of the male line, or I will have your brother disintegrated where he stands. In the underlayer, Kai was running out of ammo and running out of floor. The corridor had dissolved into a maze of shifting walls. The bioarchitecture was trying to digest them. Ilara! Kai shouted, kicking a closing wall to keep it open. How close is the node? Through there! Ilara pointed to a pulsing sphincter door guarded by two massive, heavy combat sentinels. Kai looked at the sentinels. They were 10 feet tall, armored in plating that looked impenetrable. Okay, Kai panted. Jax, Torin, keep the little drones off me. Ilara, get that door open. What are you going to do? Jax asked, firing his weapon at a swarm of silver hornets. Kai holstered his rifle and pulled 2 grenades from his belt. I am going to introduce them to the concept of blunt force trauma. He sprinted forward. The sentinels tracked him, their arm cannons spinning up. Kai slid on his knees, passing directly between the legs of the first sentinel. He slapped a grenade onto the back of its knee joint, the only exposed cabling he could see. He rolled to the side as the grenade detonated. The sentinel buckled, crashing into its partner. Now! Ilara, Kai yelled. Ilara jammed her interface tool into the door's nerve cluster. The door screamed and tore open. Kai dived through, tumbling into the central node chamber. It was a room made of pure light. In the center hung a massive heart of pulsing energy, suspended in a web of fiber optics. Kai tapped his comms. Lyra, we are in. Buy me 2 minutes. Lyra stood at the podium. The holographic script floated in front of her. Citizens, tonight we sever the chain. She looked out at the faces when she saw young girls who had never seen a father. She saw mothers who had been told their sons died of a mysterious illness. She gripped the edges of the podium. 2 minutes, she thought. Citizens of the Conquered, Lyra began, her voice shaking. She paused. She looked at the script. Then she swiped her hand through it, scattering the holographic text. They want me to tell you that men are a disease, Lyra said, her voice growing stronger. They want me to tell you that we are better off alone, that safety is worth the price of our souls. The technocrat turned, her sensors flaring red. Stick to the script, Lyra. Lyra ignored her. But I have seen the truth, she shouted. I have seen the vaults. She pointed to the technocrat. They did not die, they were stolen. My father, your sons, your brothers. They were taken from us and frozen in the dark because the council was afraid. Cut her mic, the technocrat screeched. But the audio remained live. In the underlayer, Ilara was fighting a digital war, holding the line open. They were afraid of love, Lyra cried out, tears streaming down her face. Because love is messy, love is dangerous, love makes you ask questions. She looked directly into the camera drone hovering above her. I met a human, a man, and he was not a monster. He was kind, he was funny, he was brave. He refused to be the enemy you painted him to be. Now, Kai, Ilara screamed. Kai slammed his data spike into the core of the neural lattice. Upload it, Kai roared. Upload everything. The data crystal from Vault 7 plugged into Kai's armor, dumped its payload into the planetary network. Above, in the great hall, the massive screens behind the altar flickered. The image of the Technocrats logo vanished. In its place appeared the footage from the station, the rows of frozen pods, the log entries of the culling, the face of the dead counselor admitting to the genocide. Then, the live feed from the forest appeared. The awakened men, huddled around the fire, looking at the camera with haunted human eyes. A scream tore through the great hall, not from one person, but from thousands. It was a sound of collective heartbreak, of a lie shattering instantly. The technocrat shrieked. It was a digital, discordant noise that cracked the crystal dome above. "You ruin everything," she howled. She slammed her hand onto the altar. "Initiate Phase 3. Override safety protocols. Burn them out." In the node chamber, the world turned white. The energy heart began to spin violently. The room temperature spiked. "Kai!" Ilara yelled, shielding her eyes. "The power levels are going critical. She is overloading the lattice. She is going to fry every brain connected to the network." Kai looked at the readings on his HUD. The technocrat was pushing a lethal biopulse through the system. It would sterilize the men and lobotomize the women, merging them into the hive mind by force. "Can we shut it down?" Kai yelled over the roar of the energy. "No!" Ilara shouted. "The kill switch is locked out. The only way to stop the pulse is to ground the energy. We need to divert the feedback loop." "Divert it where?" Kai asked. Ilara looked at him, her face pale. "There is no heat sink big enough," she said. "It needs a biological interface to absorb the shock. A neural pathway." Kai looked at the core. Then he looked at the neural port on his own armor, the one he used to interface with his ship. A biological interface. He realized what he had to do. "Get out of here," Kai ordered. "What?" Ilara stared at him. "Get out. Take the others and run." "Kai, no. You cannot channel that much energy. It will burn your mind out. It will kill you." "Go!" Kai roared, pushing her toward the door. "Tell Lyra. Tell her I said the view was worth the crash." Ilara hesitated, tears in her eyes, then turned and ran. Kai stood alone in the blinding light. He reached for the neural cable connecting him to the core. "Okay, Vex," he whispered to his ship's AI, even though the ship was miles away. "If you are listening, I hope you get that engine overhaul in the next life." He jammed the cable into the port at the base of his skull. Pain. It was not like fire. It was like being unmade. Kai screamed as the collective consciousness of 1 billion people and the murderous rage of an ancient AI flooded into his brain. He felt his memories boiling, the war, the smuggling runs, the quiet nights on the freighter. He gritted his teeth, blood pouring from his nose. He forced his mind to become a wall. He grabbed the pulse that was building to destroy the planet and he pulled it into himself. In the great hall, the technocrat froze. The blue light in her sensors flickered. "Error," she buzzed. "Power drain detected. Rerouting failed." Lyra saw the screens glitching. She felt the hum in the air change from a high-pitched whine to a low, throaty growl. "Kai," she whispered. She knew. She didn't know how, but she knew. She kicked off her heels and ran. She sprinted past the screaming technocrat, past the confused guards. She threw herself down the service stairs, sliding down the railings, ignoring the tearing of her gown. She reached the underlayer just as the blast doors were sealing. She slid under them, scrapping her shoulder. She found him in the node chamber. Kai was on his knees, his back arched, his hands gripping the cable connected to his head. Veins of glowing white energy were tracing their way across his armor, burning through the metal, etching into his skin. "Kai!" Lyra screamed. She ran to him, but the heat coming off him threw her back. "Let go!" she pleaded, crawling toward him. "Kai, let go. I have got it." Kai gritted out, his voice sounding like it was coming from inside a storm. The pulse. It is almost gone. The technocrat's voice boomed through the speakers, distorted and dying. You cannot hold it. Human, you are finite. You are obsolete. I am stubborn, Kai yelled back. He twisted the connection, forcing the feedback loop to reverse. He wasn't just absorbing the pulse, he was aiming it back at the source. He looked at Lyra. His eyes were burning with white light. He couldn't see her, but he faced her. I didn't stay, because I was trapped. He gasped. Kai, please. Lyra sobbed, reaching for him despite the heat blistering her hands. I stayed, because of you. Not a queen. You. He smiled. It was a weak, crooked, arrogant smile. The smile of a pilot who knew he was going to crash but intended to land on the target. See you. Around. He triggered the reversal. The energy exploded outward from him, shooting back up the data stream. In the great hall, the technocrat screamed as her chassis caught fire. The AI core inside her fused, the data spikes in her head shattering. She imploded, collapsing into a heap of molten scrap metal and silicon. In the node chamber, the shockwave threw Lyra across the room. She hit the wall and slid down, dazed. The light faded. The hum died. The room was silent, save for the sound of dripping coolant and the smell of ozone. Kai lay in the center of the room. He was not moving. The cable had fused to his armor. Smoke curled from the joints of his suit. Kai? Lyra whispered. She dragged herself over to him. She pulled his helmet release, but it was jammed. She tore at it with her bare hands, ripping her fingernails, crying out in frustration until the seal broke. She pulled the helmet off. Kai's face was pale, deathly still. Blood trickled from his ears and nose. His eyes were closed. Kai, wake up, Lyra pleaded, cradling his head in her lap. Please, that is an order. Wake up. He did not move. She pressed her ear to his chest. There was a heartbeat, faint, fluttering, but there. He is alive, Lyra shouted to the empty room. He is alive. Help me. Someone help me. Kaylin and Alara burst into the room a moment later, followed by a medical drone. Lyra held onto him, rocking back and forth, her tears falling onto his scarred face. You promised to stay, she whispered fiercely into his hair. You invited yourself into my life. Human. You do not get to leave now. The medical drone hovered over them, scanning. Critical neural trauma. The drone chimed. Coma imminent. Immediate stasis required. Do it, Lyra commanded, her voice turning to steel. Save him. As they loaded his broken body onto a stretcher, Lyra stood up. She looked at her hands, burned and shaking. She looked at the destroyed core of the lattice. Then she looked up toward the ceiling, toward the great hall where the technocrat lay dead and the council waited in terror. The silence was over. Lyra smoothed her torn gown. She wiped the blood from her face. Take him to the Royal Med Bay, she ordered Kaylin. Guard him with your life. Where are you going? Kaylin asked, looking at his sister with awe. Lyra picked up Kai's dropped plasma rifle. She checked the charge. I am going to finish the speech. The silence that had suffocated the planet for 40 years did not end with a whisper. It ended with a shout, a sob, and the roar of a million voices speaking at once. In the days following the destruction of the neural lattice, the capital city was a kaleidoscope of chaos. The meticulously ordered streets, once patrolled by silent drones and fearful citizens, became open-air forums. People gathered on the corners, in the plazas, and beneath the towering bioluminescent trees to argue, to cry, and to stare at the screens that no longer broadcast the technocrats' propaganda, but instead showed endless loops of the truth, the cryopods, the stolen men, the history of a lie. Lyra stood at the center of the storm. She had not slept in 3 days. Her royal gown was replaced by practical fatigues, her hair tied back in a severe knot, though the magnetic field still caused loose strands to drift around her like a halo. She moved from the situation room to the streets, issuing orders, calming riots, and organizing food distribution for the awakened males, who were slowly being integrated into the population. She was exhausted. Her bones ached with a fatigue that went deeper than muscle, settling into her marrow. But she did not break. She could not break. Not while he was still sleeping. The Royal Medical Wing was the only quiet place left in the palace, in the center of a high-ceilinged room, suspended in a chrysalis of translucent, amber fluid, lay Kai. The biogel pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, mimicking the beat of the heart inside. He looked peaceful, suspended in the fluid, his scars softened by the glow. But the readouts on the holographic displays told a different story. His neural pathways were fried, scorched by the sheer volume of data he had channeled. His brain was rebooting, synapse by synapse, a process that the medics said could take days or forever. Lyra visited him every evening, no matter how late the council sessions ran. She would pull up a chair to the side of the tank, resting her hand on the warm glass. "You are missing all the fun," Lyra said softly, her voice raspy from hours of debate. Today, Counselor Vane threw a data pad at me. She called me a radical anarchist. I think she meant it as an insult, but honestly, considering where we started, I took it as a compliment. She paused, waiting for a response that didn't come. The fluid bubbled gently. "We found more survivors in the northern sector," she continued, tracing the line of his jaw on the glass. 300 of them. They are confused and angry, but they are alive. Kalen is talking to them. He is good at it, better than I am. He speaks their language of loss. She leaned her forehead against the tank, closing her eyes. "I need you to wake up. Kai, I am making all these decisions and I have no idea if I am doing it right. I need my strategic advisor. I need you to make a bad joke so I can roll my eyes and feel normal for 5 seconds." She stayed there for an hour, just breathing in time with the pulsing light, before the duty of the crown pulled her away again. It was a week later when the change came. Lyra was in the middle of a heated argument with the provisional security chief about the disarmament of the elite guard when her personal comms chimed. It was a priority alert from the medical wing. Subject Alpha is conscious. Lyra didn't excuse herself. She simply turned and ran. She sprinted through the corridors, ignoring the startled looks of the courtiers, her boots slamming against the living stone floor. When she burst into the medical room, the tank was drained. The amber fluid was gone, replaced by the hiss of sterilization steam. Kai was sitting on the edge of the chrysalis platform. He was wrapped in a thermal blanket, shivering slightly. His skin was pale, and there were new, silver lines etched into his temples where the energy had scarred him, looking like circuitry tattoos. He looked up as the door slid open. His eyes were dark, unfocused for a moment, before they locked onto hers. "Hey," he croaked, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. Lyra stopped. The breath left her lungs in a rush. She walked toward him, slowly at first, as if he were a mirage that might vanish if she moved too fast. Then she broke into a run, crashing into him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Kai grunted as the wind was knocked out of him, but his arms came up instantly, locking around her waist. He buried his face in her shoulder, holding her with a desperation that matched her own. "You idiot," Lyra sobbed, the tears coming hot and fast. You absolute stubborn idiot, I missed you too. Kai mumbled into her tunic. She pulled back, framing his face with her hands. She checked his pupils, his skin, the new scars on his temples. She was laughing and crying at the same time, a messy, undignified display that she didn't care about in the slightest. You took on the entire planetary grid, she admonished, shaking him slightly. You used your brain as a lightning rod. Well, Kai said, attempting a weak grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. You said you wanted to make a splash. I figured I would go for high voltage. You were asleep for 9 days, Lyra said, wiping her face with her sleeve. You napped through the revolution. Kai, the technocrat is dead. The lattice is down. We won. We won? Kai asked, looking around the room as if expecting to see the war still raging. We won, Lyra confirmed. Kai let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging. Good. That is good, because I do not think I have it in me to fight a toaster oven right now, let alone a supercomputer. He looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the fatigue under her eyes and the weight she was carrying. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. You look tired, princess, and you look like you were microwaved, Lyra countered, a wet laugh escaping her lips. Kai leaned his forehead against hers. The contact was grounding, a physical anchor in a spinning world. I think you owe me dinner, Kai whispered, and a new ship. Mine is definitely voided on the warranty. I saved your life, Lyra whispered back, closing her eyes. The medics said you should be dead. I ordered them to fix you. I pulled rank. So we are even. Even. Kai agreed. They sat there for a long time, the silence of the room heavy with relief, their hearts beating a steady, synchronized rhythm against the quiet hum of the medical machines. The recovery of a planet was not a straight line. It was a messy, chaotic scribble. The Provisional Council was established in the old Hall of Echoes, a chamber that had been sealed for centuries. Lyra insisted on it. She wanted a room that didn't smell of the technocrat's sterile perfection. The table was round, a deliberate choice. Around it sat 12 people, 6 women from the old administration who had defected, including Alara the engineer, who now wore the robes of the infrastructure minister, and 6 men chosen from the awakened survivors. The tension in the room was palpable. It tasted of ozone and old grudges. Kai sat to Lyra's right, not as a ruler, but as an observer. He wore a simple gray tunic, refusing the armor of the guard. He wanted to be seen as a person, not a weapon. We cannot simply reintegrate them into the workforce, Counselor Vane argued, slamming her hand on the table. She was an old guard loyalist, a woman who looked at the men across the table with undisguised fear. They have no training. They have no understanding of modern protocol. They are volatile. Volatile, Kalen spoke up. He sat opposite Lyra, looking more like their father every day. We are not explosives, Counselor. We are citizens. We built this city. Or have you forgotten who laid the foundations of the spire before the silence? We remember the wars, Vane shot back. We remember the aggression. If we give you power, how long before you start fighting for dominance again? How long before the peace we built is shattered? Voices rose. Accusations flew across the table like shrapnel. The men demanded reparations. The women demanded security guarantees. Lyra stood up, ready to intervene, but Kai placed a hand on her arm. He stood up slowly. The room quieted. Despite his lack of official rank, the man who had fried his brain to save the planet commanded a certain curiosity. May I speak? Kai asked, his voice calm. Vane crossed her arms. The alien has an opinion? The human has a history lesson, Kai corrected gently. He walked to the center of the room. On my world, Earth, we had a lot of revolutions. We were very good at overthrowing tyrants. We would tear down the statues, burn the flags, and declare a new era of freedom. He looked at Kalen, then at Vane. And usually within 10 years, the revolutionaries became the new tyrants. Because they were afraid. They were afraid of the people they had defeated. They were afraid of losing control. So they built new prisons and called them re-education camps. They wrote new laws and called them public safety measures. He leaned against the table, meeting Vane's gaze. You are afraid of the men because of what you were taught. And you, he turned to the men, are angry because of what was taken from you. That is valid. But if you build this new government on the foundation of that fear and that anger, you are just painting the old cage a different color. He gestured to Lyra. The princess could have executed every loyalist in the palace. She has the codes. She has the drones. But she invited you here. She gave you a seat. That is not weakness. That is the only thing that stops the wheel from crushing you all. He sat back down. Accountability is not revenge, Kai added, and safety is not control. You have to trust each other, not because it is easy, but because the alternative is extinction. The room remained silent for a long moment. Vane looked at Kai, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at Kalen. Perhaps, Vane said stiffly, we can establish a mentorship program to bridge the gap in technical training. Kalen nodded slowly. We would be open to that, provided the mentors are not the same people who designed the cryopods. It was a small step, a fragile bridge, but it held. Outside the palace, Kai's existence was a complicated reality. He could not walk down the street without turning heads. To some, he was the Skyfaller, the hero who had broken the sky and brought the truth. They would try to touch his tunic, or offer him gifts of fruit and glowing crystals. To others, he was a monster. Mothers would pull their children close when he passed. Old women would make signs of warding against contamination. Kai handled it all with a self-deprecating grace that Lyra marveled at. One afternoon, they were walking through the lower market, inspecting the reconstruction of a hydroponics bay. A vendor, a young woman selling woven textiles, dropped a crate of heavy spools when she saw Kai approach. The spools rolled everywhere. Panic flashed in her eyes. She clearly expected the male aggressor to shout or ignore her. Kai simply knelt down. Let me get that, he said. He gathered the spools, stacking them neatly back into the crate. He picked up the crate, which looked heavy enough to break a toe, and set it effortlessly on her counter. Nice weave, Kai said, touching the fabric. Reminds me of spider silk from the Proxima belt. Very durable. The woman stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Thank you, she stammered. No charge, Kai winked. Just do not tell the princess I am working for free. She thinks I am expensive. He walked away, leaving the woman smiling nervously. A few streets over, a group of children were playing a game in the dust with glowing pebbles. They stopped when they saw him. Is that him? One whispered. The alien? He looks like a person, another said. Just bumpy. Kai stopped. He crouched down to their level. It is not bumps, it is character, Kai said, pointing to his scar. And you are playing that game wrong. The children froze. You are moving the pebbles in a circle, Kai said. That is boring. Have you ever played rock, paper, plasma grenade? The kids shook their heads. Kai grinned. Okay, listen up. It is a tactical simulation. Rock crushes scissors. Scissors cuts paper. Paper covers rock. What is a plasma grenade? A bold little girl asked. Kai tapped her nose. That is the secret weapon. You only use it when you really need to win. 10 minutes later, Lyra found him surrounded by a dozen squealing children, all throwing hand signs and arguing about the physics of paper covering rock. She watched from the shadows, her heart aching with a fierce, protective love. He was not a conqueror. He was not a king. He was just a man teaching kids how to play, building a bridge one laugh at a time. But the past could not be laughed away. It had to be mourned. Lyra, Kai, and Kaylin stood in the center of the underground facility beneath the palace, the cryo bay where Kaylin had lost his youth. The room had been cleared of the debris of the escape. The pods were empty now, their lids open like gasping mouths. The air was cold, but it no longer felt stagnant. We will not seal this room, Lyra said, her voice echoing in the vast space. We will keep it open. We will turn it into a library, an archive of the lost. She ran her hand along the rim of a pod. We need to remember that science without morality is just cruelty, she said. The council used their brilliance to justify a horror. They said it was for the greater good. Fear is a powerful editor, Kai said, standing beside her. It cuts out all the parts of the story that make you uncomfortable, until you are left with a lie that feels safe. Kaylin looked at the pod that had been his coffin. I lost 40 years in there, he said quietly. I went to sleep a boy and woke up an old man. I can never get that back. No, Lyra said, taking his hand. You cannot, and I cannot give it back to you. That is my shame to carry. It is not your shame. Lyra, Kaylin said, squeezing her hand. You were a child too. We were both victims of the same theft. You lost your brother. I lost my sister. He looked at Kai. But we are here now, and we have work to do. Lyra nodded. She looked at Kai. We will write new laws, she vowed. Laws that prioritize consent. Laws that say no life can be owned, no matter the justification. We will never again trade our humanity for safety. Never again, Kai echoed. The signal came 3 weeks later. A Federation scout ship, the UES Vanguard, dropped out of warp at the edge of the system. They had picked up the energy signature of the pulse and the subsequent dismantling of the planetary shield. An envoy shuttle landed on the palace platform. The captain, a brisk woman in a crisp blue uniform, looked at Kai with disbelief. Lieutenant Kai Miller? She asked, consulting her manifest. We have you listed as MIA, presumed dead in the crash of the Gypsy Moth. I am hard to kill, Captain, Kai said, using Lyra's line. The captain looked around at the alien architecture, at the bioluminescent trees, at the towering alien princess standing beside him. We can offer you transport back to Terra Station, the captain said. We are leaving in 48 hours. You can be home in a month. Back to civilization. Back to a hot shower and a real pension. Kai looked at the sleek Federation shuttle. It was familiar. It was safe. It was a ticket back to the life he had known. The bars, the smuggling runs, the anonymity of a crowded space station. I will let you know, Kai said. The captain nodded and returned to her ship. That night, Kai stood on the balcony of Lyra's private chambers. The twin moons were full, bathing the garden in a silver light that made the flowers glow like fallen stars. He heard the soft rustle of Lyra's gown behind him. She joined him at the railing, not touching him, but standing close enough that he could feel her warmth. You should go, Lyra said softly. Kai turned to look at her. Her face was calm, but her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears. Why? Kai asked. Because it is your home, she said. You have a life there. You have a history. Here you are an anomaly. You are a scandal. You are the difficult question everyone is trying to answer. She gripped the railing. I do not want to keep you in a cage, Kai, even a cage with the door open. If you stay, it has to be because you want to, not because you have nowhere else to go. Kai looked up at the moons. He thought about the captain's offer. He thought about his apartment on Terra Station, a small gray box with a view of a fuel depot. He thought about the silence of space. Then he looked at Lyra. He saw the woman who had defied an empire for him. He saw the queen who was trying to rebuild a world with broken tools. He saw the person who made him laugh in the middle of a firefight. I was lonely out there. Lyra, Kai said quietly. I was drifting. I had jobs, but I didn't have a purpose. I had contacts, but I didn't have this. He gestured to the city below, where lights were flickering on in windows that had been dark for decades. I used to think freedom meant not being tied down. Kai continued. But I think freedom is choosing what you are tied to. Lyra turned to him, her breath hitching. She repeated the words she had said to him that first night, but the sorrow was gone, replaced by a fragile, blooming hope. There are no men left on my planet, she whispered. She stepped closer, her hand rising to cup his cheek, her thumb tracing the scar. Except the one, she added, her voice trembling, who taught us we still need each other. She looked deep into his eyes. Stay, Kai, not as my guest, not as my advisor, stay as my partner, my friend, my equal. Help me build this. Help me teach them that love is not a weakness. Kai covered her hand with his own. He felt the calluses on his palm against the softness of her skin. He realized he wasn't torn at all. The decision had been made the moment he plugged his brain into the lattice. He belonged here. He belonged with her. I am not going anywhere, Kai said. The relief on her face was radiant. It broke through her composure like the sun breaking through clouds. Are you sure? She asked. It will be hard. They will stare. They will judge. Let them stare, Kai said, leaning in. Let them see what it looks like when two people actually give a damn about each other. He kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss in the maintenance shaft, desperate and frantic. And it wasn't like the kiss in the node chamber, tragic and final. This kiss was steady. It was slow. It was deep with trust and rich with promise. It was a seal on a contract that had no expiration date. Kai felt her relax against him, her body molding to his. He felt the tension leave his own shoulders. The living walls of the balcony sensed the surge of emotion, the genuine, harmonious love. And they bloomed. Vines of white flowers unfurled rapidly along the railing, scenting the air with jasmine and hope. The final scene was not of a battle or a speech, but of a walk. The great doors of the council chamber opened. The sunlight streamed in, bright and unfiltered. Lyra and Kai walked in together. They were not wearing armor. They were not hiding. Lyra wore her royal white, and Kai wore a tunic of deep blue, the color of the deep ocean. They walked hand in hand. His dark, scarred fingers laced through her pale, luminous ones. The counselors stood as they entered. Some looked wary, some looked hopeful, but they all looked. Through the open windows, the sound of the city drifted in. It was the sound of construction hammers ringing against stone, the sound of debates in the market, and rising above it all, the sound of children laughing. In a courtyard below, a group of young girls were chasing a ball. A young boy, one of the first to be awakened and reunited with his family, was running with them. He tripped, and a girl stopped, offering him a hand up. They laughed, high-fived, and kept running. Lyra squeezed Kai's hand. He squeezed back. They reached the head of the table. Lyra did not sit on the throne. She pulled out a chair for herself, and then she pulled out the chair next to it for Kai. "Shall we begin?" Lyra asked. "We shall," Kai said, sitting down beside her. The camera pulled back, rising up through the crystal dome of the hall, rising higher and higher. It showed the palace, glowing with life. It showed the city, where men and women walked the streets together, awkward but trying. It showed the forest, reclaiming the scars of the crash sites. It showed a planet that was no longer silent, spinning in the dark, healing, loud and messy and alive. The human and the alien princess sat at the heart of it. Two different species, two different worlds, writing a new story together.